Chapter 176. Yili raised an eyebrow. She stood up and extinguished the candle on the table with a wave of her sleeve. A bit of dim moonlight spilled in from the window lattice on the wall. Although it was still dusky, it didn't affect Yili's actions. She calmly walked to Ensan's side. "It's not to monitor us." Ensan nodded and pointed to a small house next to them. "It's to monitor them. But there's also one person watching us. It should be in passing." Han Mingxi also quickly adapted to the dusky room. He whispered with a smile, "These people are really strange. Then why did they pull us in?" Yili smiled. "Since they are scheming, then it will be revealed. After being tired all night, I think we should rest first." Ensan nodded and pointed to the bedroom inside. "Gongzi, go in and rest. Han Gongzi and I will stay outside to keep watch." Han Mingxi wanted to refute, but he saw Yili nod and turn around without hesitation. She waved to the two and went in to rest. Blinking his eyes, Han Mingxi said with grievance, "I also want to rest. Junwei wasn't the only one who didn't sleep well in the wilderness, okay?" And San coldly glanced at him and pointed to the bamboo bed in the hall. "You can sleep there." Han Mingxi was speechless. Was that bamboo bed half as long as him? The bed inside was obviously very big. As if seeing Han Mingxi's thoughts, and San didn't change his expression and moved to the door of the room that Yili went in. He took a chair and sat down. The meaning was obvious. If Han Mingxi wanted to go in, he would have to step in front of him. Han Mingxi could only angrily shrink into the bamboo bed to rest. He was secretly regretting in his heart, "Why did I say that I would live with Junwei?" As usual, Yili woke up early in the morning. Before she even got up, she knew that she probably wouldn't be able to leave today. The dripping sound from outside indicated that it was raining heavily. Yili had already experienced the rainy weather in the south, but this rain came too suddenly. If they had slept in the wilderness last night, they would have been very unlucky now. Thinking of this, Yili suddenly felt that the Luo tribe's young master was not that hateful after all. She tidied up her clothes and went out. And San was still sitting on the chair at the door with his eyes closed. But Yili knew that he wasn't asleep. Hearing Yili's footsteps, Ensan immediately opened her eyes and looked back at her. "Let's go in and rest for a while." "I won't be able to leave in the morning," Yili said softly as she glanced at Han Mingxi, who was curled up on the bamboo couch with a frown. Ensan hesitated for a moment, but still nodded and went in. Yili entered the living room and opened the window to admire the rain outside. "Junwei, you're so cruel. You're taking up such a big bed, but you want me to sleep on the bamboo couch." Unknowingly, Han Mingxi had opened his eyes and was lazily lying on the bamboo couch. His bewitching eyes looked sadly at Yili. Yili looked back at him and said with a smile, "You can go in and sleep with Zhuojing now." Han Mingxi raised his eyebrows and looked at her with a smile. "There's no reason why I can't sleep with Junwei. This young master likes to be clean. I like to eat alone. I always keep the good things to myself," Yili said without changing her expression. Han Mingxi mumbled a few words and sat up. Frowning, he tidied up the soft dark red clothes on his body and walked to Yili's side to look at the rain outside the window. He sighed softly. The rainy days in Nanjiang have a different style, but it rains too often and it's a bit unbearable. Before Yili had time to answer, footsteps sounded outside the door. Not long after, there was a knock on the door. Opening the door, Sickly Scholar was standing at the door holding an oil paper umbrella. After half a night of rest, his complexion didn't become better, but looked even more sallow. His empty hand was raised to cover his mouth, and from time to time, there were a few muffled coughs. "Young Master Han, young Master Chu, did I disturb you?" Yili smiled faintly. "It's fine. Young Master, please come in." Sickly Scholar stepped into the room and looked around. His gaze fell on the door of the inner room. Yili smiled faintly. "Zhuojing is still resting. Young Master, please sit down." Young Master came early in the morning too. Sickly Scholar sat on the side and coughed softly before saying, "I didn't expect to meet young Master Han on this trip to Nanjiang." Young Master Han coughed. "You should know me, right?" Han Mingxi did not expect him to go straight to the point. He was stunned for a moment before he smiled and said, "That's right. The reputation of the third master of the Shieling King of Hell's Pavilion has been known for a long time. From the way he addressed Sickly Scholar and addressed himself, it was clear that Han Mingshi didn't want to provoke this person and was extremely afraid of him. Sickly Scholar smiled faintly. Don't be so polite. The Yinwang Chamber Master and your brother are close friends, and I also have some friendship with your brother. But this young master looks very unfamiliar. Yili thought for a moment, then smiled faintly and said, I'm not a person of Jianghu, so I'm a little ignorant. Young master, please don't laugh at me. I don't know you, and you don't know me, so we're even. Sickly Scholar stared at Yili, as if he was evaluating something. Han Mingshi didn't want him to keep staring at Yili, so he interrupted with a smile. I heard from my brother that young master doesn't like to go out in the past few years. May I know what business you have in Nanjiang? Is there anything the Tianyi Pavilion can help you with? Sickly Scholar was slightly stunned, then shook his head and smiled. It's just some personal business. There's no need to trouble young Master Han. Since he didn't want to talk about it, Han Mingshi naturally wouldn't ask again. In fact, he wanted to stay as far away from him as possible. Why didn't Imo Xiaoyao kill this plague back then? Han Mingshi cursed in his heart with a smile on his face. Sickly Scholar obviously didn't want to waste time on his personal business. He looked at Yili and Han Mingshi and said with a smile, What do the two of you think of this stronghold? Han Mingshi frowned. I've been to Nanjiang 2 or 3 times, but I didn't notice that the Luai tribe's stronghold was so close. What does young Master Chu think? Sickly Scholar looked at Yili and asked. Yili frowned. The Luai tribe is said to be one of the largest tribes in Nanjiang. However, I don't think there are more than 100 people in this stronghold. I heard that the tribes in Nanjiang are usually very secretive, but why would this Luai tribe's stronghold be built on the side of the road? Han Mingshi raised his eyebrows and looked at Yili with a smile. So Junwei saw through it last night. Since there are so many of them, why come here? Yili raised her eyebrows. Do we have a choice? We don't have any flattery, and there are poisonous snakes everywhere. The other party originally wanted to invite us to be guests. Being invited politely is much better than being tied up and thrown in like a dumpling. However, I'm curious as to what the other party wants to do by putting up such a formation. This one, other than offending the young tribe leader in Yonglin City, there doesn't seem to be anything that can make the other party go through so much trouble. After saying that, Yi Li's gaze fell on Sickly Scholar. Sickly Scholar sighed and said, Young Master Chu is so young, but it's rare for him to be quick-witted. That's right, they are coming for us. Yi Li raised her eyebrows. I'd like to hear the details. I believe that the two of you also noticed last night that there are people watching us from outside. The goal of the Luai tribe is actually very simple. They are after a treasure on Master Liang. Sickly Scholar said lightly. Han Mingshi smiled and said, This one has never heard of young Master Chu changing to escort. Sickly Scholar frowned and held back his cough. He looked at Han Mingshi and smiled indifferently. That's right. I really didn't follow to protect Master Liang. Chapter 177. Han Mingshi leaned back in his chair and glanced at Sickly Scholar. I know that young Master also wants that kind of thing. Since that is the case, young Master can just kill that old man. Why go through the trouble of sending him to Nanjiang? The Sickly Scholar looked at Han Mingshi, and a trace of viciousness flashed across his originally delicate and smiling face. His entire person suddenly became even more sinister and gloomy, completely different from the sickly and weak scholar from before. That's right, I can kill that guy. But it is a pity. He is not an idiot. That thing is in the capital of Nanjiao. He only has the token to get that thing, and it is only half of it. In this world, other than himself, no one knows where the other half of the token is, and no one knows how to use it after getting it. Anger flashed through Sickly Scholar's eyes. It was clear that he was very angry at Master Liang's cunning. Han Mingshi raised an eyebrow and said with a smile, Perhaps you can consider torture. Sickly Scholar snorted coldly. Does young Master Han really not know who he is? Han Mingshi shrugged indifferently. Seeing Yi Li turn to look at him, he smiled and said, I know. Other than the 4 wealthiest families in the Dechu state, the 5th family, the Liang family of the Northwest, is even richer than my big brother. Also, if my big brother loves money as much as his life, then this Master Liang is more important to money than his life. I heard that a bandit once kidnapped his favorite concubine and demanded 20,000 taels as ransom. He didn't even care. Also, don't look at how rich he is. Usually, he saves when he can. His life is worse than that of a normal merchant. Last night, didn't he boast to you that he went to the Wind and Moon Pavilion? My big brother hates him the most because he went to the Wind and Moon Pavilion for one night and only ordered the cheapest cup of tea. He didn't even spend 20 taels. If this kind of person really has any treasure, even if you kill him, he probably won't give it to you. Yili looked at Sickly Scholar. I am more curious why young master is telling us this information. Aren't you afraid that we'll be tempted by the money too? Sickly Scholar said indifferently, I need your help. Last night, I saw that young master's martial arts were not bad. As for young Master Chu, although I can't see the depth of his abilities, I'm sure he's not simple either. As for young Master Han, I naturally won't let you suffer any losses after this. Han Mingshi rested his chin on his hand and tilted his head to look at him. I thought you said you didn't need the help of the Tianyi Pavilion? Sickly Scholar nodded and said, I don't need any information from the Tianyi Pavilion. Since I happened to meet Mr. Han, I have no choice but to invite you along. Can we refuse? Han Mingshi asked. I'm afraid not. Sickly Scholar said in a low voice. His slightly gloomy gaze slowly swept across the two of them. Han Mingshi only felt as if he had been stabbed by a knife, making him uncomfortable. Yili's expression was the same as usual, but she couldn't help but clench her fists a little tighter in her sleeves. Sickly Scholar's smile was cold and ferocious. He elegantly raised his left hand and admired his fingers, which had a slightly different skin color from his right hand. He smiled faintly and said, I believe young Master Han won't refuse, right? Han Mingshi's expression changed. He looked at Sickly Scholar warily and said, You poisoned us? Sickly Scholar responded with a smile and didn't answer. Han Mingshi's expression darkened. Sickly Scholar seemed to have expected that Han Mingshi wouldn't refuse. He tilted his head and looked at Yili. What about young Master Chu? Yili reached out and poured herself a cup of herbal tea. She frowned slightly at the bitterness in the cold tea and said, I refuse. Refuse? Sickly Scholar was a little surprised. After being startled for a moment, he looked at Yili with a more threatening gaze. Young Master Chu, are you sure? Yili smiled faintly. She put down the teacup and said, 2 days ago, I heard of young Master's reputation. I also know that young Master's use of poison is unparalleled in the world. But unless young Master plans to use an immediate lethal poison, it's best not to make a move. What do you mean? Sickly Scholar stared at Yili with a gloomy expression. Yili looked down at her hands on her knees and said softly, I heard that young Master accidentally injured your heart many years ago. Although this one doesn't know much about this kind of injury, I do have some superficial knowledge about the pathology of it. In this one's opinion, if young Master can't kill the other party with a flick of a finger, then it's best not to make a move. Because young Master's heart may not be able to withstand a long period of violent shock, right? The killing intent in Sickly Scholar's eyes almost solidified in an instant. He gritted his teeth and said, Are you sure I can't kill you? Yili smiled. Young Master, you can try. Sickly Scholar naturally wouldn't try. This Chu Junwei in front of him hadn't made a move the entire time and didn't seem to have profound internal strength. But his intuition told him that this indifferent youth wasn't simple. Not to mention that there was Han Mingshi eyeing him like a tiger watching its prey. There was also a strong guard in the room that hadn't appeared yet. Han Mingshi was sitting in a chair outside. He propped up half of his handsome face and looked at the gloomy Sickly Scholar. Then he looked at the calmly smiling Yili and blinked. He seemed to have heard an incredible secret. Haha, young Master Chu really isn't an ordinary person. But it's too late for you to regret now. Sickly Scholar said with a cold smile. What do you mean? Han Mingshi narrowed his eyes and asked. Sickly Scholar said, After I left the little building, I guessed that the person surnamed Liang was no longer in the little building. You did it on purpose? Han Mingshi said. Sickly Scholar nodded and said, Yes, the person surnamed Liang came to Nanjiang to find the Luai tribe. Last night, they didn't come to make trouble for us, but to receive him. Han Mingshi frowned and said, So what? Sickly Scholar snorted softly. What? He has already reached his destination. The people who know his whereabouts will naturally be silenced. If they didn't invite us all here, if one escaped, wouldn't all their previous efforts have been wasted? The day before yesterday, when Zhang Kuei came over to chat with us and invite us to travel together, it was your idea? Yili looked at Sickly Scholar and asked calmly. Yes, Zhang Kuei thought that he was just escorting the person surnamed Liang to Nanjiao to do business. I told him that the two of you have extraordinary skills. If you travel together, you can take care of each other on the way. To be honest, I originally didn't want to choose you, but there really aren't many people who want to go to Nanjiang at this time of year. But I need people with good skills to help me. It just so happens that young Master Han has some relationship with me, right? Han Mingshi smiled and said, I'm more curious why you didn't use the people of the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce. I believe that there are many people in the Yanwang Chamber who would be willing to go through water and tread on fire for you, right? Sickly Scholar's face sank. He said coldly, This is my own business. Yili stood up and walked to the window. She looked outside and saw that it was still raining heavily. Then she turned and said, What kind of treasure does Master Liang have that would make someone like young Master spend so much effort? It's better that young Master Chu doesn't know. After all, the less you know, the safer. For young Master Han's sake, I won't make a move against you after this. Sickly Scholar promised with a calm face. Yili glanced at him indifferently and said with a smile, I'm sorry, but I don't like being kept in the dark and used as a tool. Chapter 178. Sickly Scholar sneered. If you don't help me, I won't be able to get out. Take a good look outside. Han Mingshi quickly floated to the window and looked outside. The distant scenery was faintly discernible in the rain, but there was a faint, strange fragrance in the air. Yili pulled Han Mingshi away and closed the window. Sickly Scholar looked at Yili and nodded. I was right. Young Master Chu also has a good understanding of poisons. Yili shook her head. I don't know much about poisons, but a few days ago, I was drugged by a kind of knockout drug from Nanjiang, so I was more vigilant. Yili carefully recalled the situation at that time when she fell into Yi Yu's hands. Finally, she determined that Yi Yu didn't poison her after she entered the hall, but the knockout drug was placed there from the beginning. There were 2 half-open pots of orchids placed at the entrance of Yahua Palace, and there were 2 pots of the same orchids placed in the hall. Later, in the small courtyard where Mo Jingli imprisoned her, she also saw the same orchids. Of course, maybe they weren't orchids, but just looked like them. Sickly Scholar said, Our path up the mountain has been cut off, and the flowers on the hillside outside. Young Master Han, it doesn't matter if you smell it now. It's not a big deal. This poisonous flower is only effective during the day, and it's sunny. But once the rain stops, the fragrance of the flowers will become highly toxic, making it difficult for people to move. Han Mingshi looked at him and said, Do you have an antidote? Sickly Scholar proudly said, It's just a small poison. What's so difficult about it? Han Mingshi went back to his seat and sat down. So, unless we are willing to help you, you won't give us the antidote? Why don't we go down the mountain before the rain stops? Sickly Scholar laughed and said, People who practice martial arts naturally don't have to worry about whether there's a path to walk on or off the mountain. You can go out and give it a try. It's the same as luring the people and the poisonous insects away. Han Mingshi recalled the densely packed group of snakes last night and felt goosebumps all over his body. He quickly rubbed his arms and looked at Yili. Yili stood with her hands behind her back and said indifferently, Then I can assume that young master not only has the antidote to deal with those poisonous flowers and plants, but also has a way to deal with poisonous snakes and insects. And all we have to do is deal with those people, right? Sickly Scholar nodded in a good mood. Not bad. Her unhappiness from being poked in her weak spot finally dissipated a little. The murderous look in her eyes when she looked at Yili also gradually dissipated. Yili pondered for a moment before nodding. I can promise you. Hey, Junwei, aren't you afraid that he will go back on his word and kill you? Han Mingshi reminded her in a low voice. Sickly Scholar was not a kind person. Yili smiled. I believe in the promise of the Yanwang Chamber's 3rd master. In that case, it's a deal. Hey, does that guy have such a thing as credibility? After more than an hour, the rain finally stopped. The rain in Nanjiang came quickly and the sky cleared quickly. Not long after the rain stopped, the warm sunlight sprinkled over the earth. The ground that had just been washed by the rain emitted a fresh smell of soil. If it wasn't for the pervasive fragrance, it would be even more wonderful. As soon as the rain stopped, and San came out from inside, she glanced at the 3 people in the hall, 2 sitting and 1 standing. She didn't look surprised that there was an extra person. Yili pointed to the dry food on the table and said, "Let's fill our stomachs first. I don't think Master will bring us breakfast today." And San nodded and sat down. Under the gazes of the 3 people, she unhurriedly filled her stomach. Sickly Scholar looked at Insan's slow, chewing with great interest. He smiled at Yili and said, "Young Master Chu has an expert like Garjua protecting him. No wonder he dares to come to Nanjiang alone." "Brother Zhua, what did you just say? You didn't sleep last night?" And San looked up at him and said indifferently, "Young Master only has me by his side. Naturally, he has to be careful." Sickly Scholar's eyes darkened. It wasn't easy to have a guard like this. From what Jing said, Chu Junwei usually had a lot of people by his side. Now that he had only 1 guard, it was special. Then, this Chu Junwei's identity was probably not ordinary. He glanced indifferently at Han Mingxi. Someone who could be friends with the younger brother of the Tianyi Pavilion's master was naturally not an ordinary person. Sensing Sickly Scholar's probing gaze, Han Mingxi smiled innocently at him. "Don't ask him." He also didn't know Chu Junwei's identity. The 4 of them tidied up and left the small building. The sunlight outside was just right. The fragrance of flowers in the air was getting stronger. However, with the antidote provided by Sickly Scholar, it didn't have any effect on the 4 of them. When they returned to the small building next door, Master Liang, the steward, and the guard called Zheng Kue were indeed gone. Han Mingxi looked at Sickly Scholar with schadenfreude. "It seems they've been gone for at least 2 hours. How are you going to find them now?" As long as they had someone familiar with the terrain leading the way, 2 hours was enough for them to escape far away, even if it was raining. Sickly Scholar's lips curved into a cold smile. He said indifferently, "As long as they're still in Nanjiang, they won't be able to escape from my grasp. Besides, why do you think they're waiting for us here? The place they're going to is definitely less than 20 li away from here." Sickly Scholar leisurely took out a small box from his pocket. He opened it, and a small green moth flew out. The moth flapped its wings twice. It stopped for a moment on a small porcelain bottle in Sickly Scholar's hand. It then flew up again and flew into the depths of the village. "Let's go," Sickly Scholar said to the 3 of them. He was satisfied with the small medicine bottle. The 3 of them followed behind the little moth. The entire village was empty. It was too dark last night and no one noticed. In this village, other than the 2 small buildings they lived in, the other buildings were very simple. It didn't look like a village where the common people gathered. It looked more like a temporary stronghold. The moth flew all the way into the depths of the mountain. Along the way, countless venomous snakes and insects were killed or injured by the Sickly Scholar's overbearing poison. Without anyone deliberately controlling them, these snakes and insects also knew how to avoid harm and seek benefits, so they didn't attack them in groups. After walking for more than an hour, the moth stopped at the edge of a cliff. It lingered around Sickly Scholar and didn't want to go forward. Could it be that Gongzi's moth led us the wrong way? Han Mingxi laughed. Sickly Scholar looked at him faintly. He put the little moth back into the box and said to Han Mingxi, "Go down." "Go down?" Han Mingxi was startled. He quickly reacted and said with a face of disbelief, "You're asking me to go down? Do you know where this is? This is Nanjiang. Who knows how deep it is? Who knows if there are poisonous snakes or monsters? You want me to go down?" Sickly Scholar said, "Your Qinggong is the best. How about you let Chu Gongzi go down first?" Han Mingxi's handsome face was pale as he looked at Sickly Scholar carelessly touching his left hand. He then looked at Yili and Insan who were standing to the side. Although they hadn't known each other for long, Han Mingxi still knew that Junwei's Qinggong wasn't that good. If something happened down there, it would be too late to escape. He snorted, "Go down then. Just you wait. When you open up Nanjiang, this Gongzi will kill you." Chapter 179. Han Mingxi tapped his feet lightly, his entire body fluttering like a huge dark red butterfly. Then he fell down the cliff. Sickly Scholar softly praised. Second young Master Han's Qinggong is indeed much better than young Master Mingyue's. However, it was only Qinggong. Compared to the scheming and ever-changing young Master Mingyue, Sickly Scholar did not think much of Han Mingxi. As long as he promised not to kill Han Mingxi for young Master Mingyue's sake, it would be fine. Zhuojing. Yili frowned as she stood at the edge of the cliff and looked down. She could only see billowing white clouds and not the scenery below. This cliff was probably more than twice as deep as the one below Black Cloud Peak. It was impossible to directly descend to the bottom of the cliff with Qinggong. And San stepped forward and stretched her hand out of the cliff. A silver thread with something attached to it quickly slid down the cliff. After a while, San slowly retracted the thread and wrapped it around her palm. She turned to Yili and said, "Young master, the bottom of the cliff is at least 1,000 feet, and the cliff is very smooth." Yili muttered to herself. 1,000 feet was close to 300 meters. Such a high cliff was actually smooth, and there was not even much vegetation. It was obviously not natural. It seemed that Sickly Scholar's moth was indeed brought to the right place. Sickly Scholar looked at Insan's movements with curiosity. Just as he was about to speak, a figure came out from the bottom of the cliff and landed on the ground in a sorry state. Before he could even catch his breath, Han Mingxi began to curse, "Sickly Scholar, just you wait. If I die here because of you, I guarantee that the Tianyi Pavilion will hunt you down until you die." Sickly Scholar's expression did not change, as if he did not care about Han Mingxi's threat at all. He asked coldly, "What's down there?" Han Mingxi sneered. "What's there? What's there? Even if there's something, with your lousy Qinggong, can your lousy body go down? Don't expect this young master to bring you down, unless you want to fall to your death together with this young master." Seeing the Sickly Scholar frown, Han Mingxi mocked maliciously. It seemed that he had indeed encountered danger at the bottom of the cliff, which made him forget his fear of Sickly Scholar. He could only use sarcasm to calm his anger and fear. "Brother Han," Yili called out in a deep voice. There was no benefit in angering Sickly Scholar at this time. Han Mingxi was not an impulsive person. After being reminded by Yili, he quickly suppressed his anger and said, "There is a sea of flowers at the bottom of the cliff, but I guess those words are poisonous." There were many poisonous snakes in the flowers, and there were also a few skeletons. It was unknown whether they had accidentally fallen down or had been thrown down by someone. However, in the middle of the cliff, there was a large hole in the ground about 70 feet away. It seemed to be an entrance. However, he looked at Sickly Scholar with a smile that was not a smile and said, "The cliff was deliberately cleaned up by someone, so there was no place to borrow strength. I was not joking. With my Qinggong, it is impossible for me to bring a person down without falling to the bottom of the cliff full of poisonous snakes and creatures. As for the three of you, with your Qinggong, wanting to go down alone is simply a delusion." Speaking of his Qinggong, Han Mingxi was very proud. No wonder there were no guards along the way. Were they certain that we would not be able to find the way? Sickly Scholar muttered to himself. If the one who went down was not Han Mingxi with his Qinggong, they would have died. There must be another way. I do not believe that all of those people are Qinggong experts. Han Mingxi proudly said, "That is natural. Do you think that peerless Qinggong is easy to learn? However, even if there is another way, can you find it now?" None of them were experts in mechanisms, not to mention that they were in the southern Xinjiang, which they were not familiar with. More importantly, those people from the southern Xinjiang were not fools. Would they just sit there and wait for them to find the way in? "You." Sickly Scholar frowned as he looked at Han Mingxi. Han Mingxi quickly hid behind Zhuojing, not even bothering to poke his head out. "Don't look for me. Even if I can get in, I will not be able to. In terms of martial arts, I am not good enough. I think that even if there is an entrance, it will not be able to use Qinggong. If I go alone, I will at most alert the enemy." "What is in there that is so important?" Yili asked with a frown. "Do you have a way?" Sickly Scholar frowned as he looked at her. Yili did not answer and repeated her question. "What is the thing that young master is looking for?" Sickly Scholar snorted coldly. There were 3 people there, and he was alone. It was not realistic to want to capture Chu Junwei and threaten him. After a while, he said in a low voice, "It is a strange poison." Hearing this, the interest of the others immediately decreased by half. Han Mingshi asked curiously, "Young master is famous for his poison skills. What kind of poison in this world can tempt young master to the point of risking his life?" Sickly Scholar smiled coldly, and his eyes flashed with a sinister light. "A poison that can make people beg for death." Yili was interested in what kind of poison could make people beg for death. There were many ways to make people suffer in this world. There was no need to risk his life to find some strange poison. As for what it meant to make people beg for death, if a person really wanted it, there were many ways to do it. How could they not beg for death? They did not want to die because they still had hope and worries. However, the sinister look in Sickly Scholar's eyes made Yili's heart skip a beat. A vague idea appeared in her mind. Young master is a poison master. Why do you need to take the risk to find some strange poison? Yili said with an indifferent expression. Sickly Scholar let out a short laugh, which was filled with resentment and malice. Then, he coughed violently. "That's right. I do have a lot of good stuff, but it's not enough. The most painful poison in the world is in the southern border." Haha. Yili looked at him with wide eyes. Her voice was slightly raised with curiosity. "I heard that the most painful poison in this world is the heartbreak bone-rotting pill. The poisoned person will have their liver and intestines broken and their bones shattered. They will cry for 49 days before dying. Could there be a poison more terrifying than this?" Sickly Scholar said with a proud smile. "That's right. The heartbreak bone-rotting pill is indeed poisonous. However, it needs to be taken orally. Moreover, it has an extremely strong medicinal smell. Even if it is covered up with other smells, it cannot fool people who are skilled in medicine or have a good sense of smell. However, this is different. The poison made from it is truly colorless and tasteless. Just 1 drop is enough to send a person to hell, never to be reincarnated." "Hidden net flower?" Han Mingshi asked curiously. Sickly Scholar gave a disdainful snort. "Do you think the south only has the hidden net flower? Compared to the hidden net flower hidden in the south, this is a true peerless treasure, blue sky flower." "Blue sky flower?" Han Mingshi was confused. The name sounds quite elegant. However, I have never heard of it. Sickly Scholar gave a disdainful snort. Yili frowned. She said lightly, "Blue sky yellow springs." Sickly Scholar said with a smile, "That's right. This poison is called blue sky yellow springs." "It doesn't sound like anything," Han Mingshi said. "Compared to the heartbreak bone-rotting pill, this name could be called poetic." Chapter 180. Sickly Scholar laughed. "It's really nothing. Once this poison touches the human body, it will immediately merge into the blood vessels in the body. Unless you draw out all the blood in your body, this poison will never be cured. Even if there is a way to change the blood, as long as there is a little bit of this poison in the blood, it will quickly spread and grow in the fresh blood." Han Mingshi was confused. "Why is it called Blue Sky Underworld?" "Haha, one is in the sky, the other is on the earth. A person who has been poisoned by this poison will look fine on the outside, but the inside will slowly rot away. The more poison accumulates in the inside, the more beautiful the appearance will become. However, he cannot touch any human or animal." "Is it contagious?" Yili lowered her eyes and said in a low voice, "No, how can it be contagious?" Sickly Scholar laughed. "Playing with a poison that can't be controlled and spread will cause a lot of trouble. The reason why he can't touch anyone is because any warm living thing will cause him unbearable pain and increase the rate at which his internal organs fester. Therefore, he can only hide in a place isolated from the world and let himself rot. His limbs will be paralyzed first, and he might starve to death before he rots." The 3 people present felt a chill when they heard this, especially when they heard Sickly Scholar's sinister voice. Even though the sun was high up in the sky, it still made their hair stand on end. "That's impossible. If it was just a poison, it wouldn't be so important," Yili pointed out. No matter how precious a poison was, it was still a poison. Unless it was in the hands of someone like Sickly Scholar, it probably couldn't compare to an antidote pill that could cure hundreds of poisons. Sickly Scholar said in a low voice, "That's right. It is said that if the blue sky underworld is combined with another medicine, it can revive the dead. The so-called antidote pill that can cure hundreds of poisons can only cure a few common poisons. However, the antidote pill made with the blue sky underworld flower can cure any poison or injury as long as the person still has a breath of life. It can also prolong life. Do you think no one will fight for such a treasure? If the one surnamed Liang made it into a pill, no one would think it was too expensive even if it cost 10,000 gold." Yili hid the light in her eyes and nodded indifferently. "So that's how it is. It is indeed a treasure. Is young master looking for it to cure your illness?" Sickly Scholar sneered and said, "Curing diseases and making poisons do not interfere with each other. Then, when the time comes, this humble one will get a pill. That should be a reasonable reward, right?" Yili asked. Sickly Scholar stared at her coldly. "Reward? Could it be that young master has never paid anyone for their help? Since young master said that it can be used to treat illnesses and poison, then I can assume that jade falling flower is not that rare. I'm not good at medicine, so the blue jade falling flower is useless. Therefore, a pill that can detoxify and prolong one's life shouldn't be too much, right?" Sickly Scholar's expression changed. After a long while, he said in a deep voice, "I promise you." "Very good. I can do it myself," Sickly Scholar retorted. Letting someone bring him down made him feel like a weakling. He couldn't accept this. Zhuojing glanced at him and said, "If you're not afraid of falling to your death, young master can try it himself." "You." Sickly Scholar's expression darkened. He saw Yili wave her hand at him. She had already picked up the rope and brought it to the place Han Mingshi pointed out. She skillfully fixed the iron hook at a certain place and then threw the rope down. Yili grabbed the rope and slowly slid down the cliff. Han Mingshi poked his head out to look. He could still see her grabbing the rope and slowly sliding down the cliff. It seemed slow, but her movements were strangely skilled and fast. In a short while, she had already disappeared into the clouds. After a while, the rope that was originally swaying gently calmed down. Then it shook even more violently, and the iron hook that was fixed to the rock gradually broke away. Han Mingshi anxiously wanted to grab it, and San said in a deep voice, "It's fine. Young master has already arrived." Sure enough, after the iron hook was released, the rope at the bottom seemed to be pulled down halfway and quickly slid down the cliff. On the side, and San had already started to prepare according to Yili's method. Sickly Scholar didn't argue anymore. When Insan went down, he directly used Qinggong to land beside Insan and grabbed him tightly. The two of them began to move down. This time, they were clearly much slower than Yili. Han Mingshi stayed alone at the edge of the cliff. He curiously looked at the iron hook and thin rope that was tightly gripping the huge rock. He muttered softly, "Junwei is really a strange boy." When Yili slid down more than 60 zhong, she saw a cave that was about the height of a person not far away. She couldn't help but rejoice in her heart that when she discovered that the rope was thin and strong, she had lengthened the length of the rope by a lot. Otherwise, she probably wouldn't have been able to reach here. Gently swinging to the right, Yili accurately landed on the edge of the cave. She stood up straight and firmly stood on the edge. Han Mingshi didn't see wrongly. This was indeed a very deep and bottomless cave. It was like a passage that was cut in the cliff. In front of her was a pitch-black area that led to an unknown place. Looking at the obvious new footprints on the ground, it seemed like these people were very confident. They didn't even send someone to guard the entrance. Yili carefully put away the rope and walked a few steps forward, waiting carefully. After a while, San brought Sickly Scholar to the entrance of the cave. The two of them had just stood there. Before San even had the rope, Han Mingshi lightly landed and swept into the cave. They really did enter from here. Yili pointed to the footprints on the ground and the top of their heads. "Be careful. There should be a mechanism up there. When I came down just now, I looked carefully. There should be some kind of mechanism on the cliff that can be controlled, so they didn't use Qinggong to climb down. It's a pity that we don't have time to slowly look for it." Sickly Scholar's face wasn't very good. When he came down just now, although it didn't take much effort to be carried by Insan, it still wasn't good. Let's go. Don't worry about the mechanism first. Yili frowned and asked, can you resist coughing? Nodding somewhat stiffly, Sickly Scholar took out a bottle of medicine and poured it all into his mouth. His face became even more unsightly. Don't worry, I won't cough again. Yili nodded, and San took the lead and walked in front. Sickly Scholar followed. Yili and Han Mingxi brought up the rear. After walking for a while, the tunnel became gloomy and dark, but it still looked dry. After the light completely disappeared, Sickly Scholar took out a match and lit it. Yili frowned. Lighting a fire in a tunnel with thin air really wasn't a good idea, but there was no other way now. Han Mingxi followed behind. Looking at Insan and Yili, one on the left and one on the right, he raised his eyebrows and laughed in a low voice. Junwei, aren't you guys too nervous? Yili rolled her eyes at him. Compared to the outstanding Qinggong Master Han, how can I not be nervous? Sickly Scholar turned back to look at the three people. Holding the match, he continued to walk forward. This tunnel built in the mountain clearly didn't exist for the purpose of creating a diversion, so they didn't encounter any forks along the way. Inside the labyrinth, and the terrain kept going downwards. When Yili estimated that they were almost at the foot of the mountain, they finally heard movement in front. Sickly Scholar raised his hand to extinguish the match. Standing at the corner, he looked out. Sure enough, he saw two men wearing Nanjiang clothing standing not far away. Behind the two was a door. The noise was coming from inside. Chapter 181. The two guards clearly didn't think that anyone would come from this direction, so they were really talking and laughing in a low voice. But the straight passage in front of them was at least 100 meters long and was quite narrow. None of them could place the two gatekeepers at such a distance without making a sound. And if these two people made any movements, it would definitely alert the people inside. Sickly Scholar silently took out an exquisite box from his chest and aimed it in front of him. With two whooshing sounds, the two southern border people immediately froze. The four people quickly sneaked over. Sickly Scholar was the first to flash through the door. Yili paused when she passed by the door. She turned her head and saw that the two people were still standing with a trace of black blood flowing out of their lips. It was clear that they were no longer breathing. Her eyes darkening, Yili also flashed through the door. The inside of the door was completely different from the darkness and coldness of the passage outside. It was hot and bright inside. Not far away, there were people coming and going, and the security became much tighter. But the four of them were all above average experts, so it wasn't difficult for them to avoid these guards. Crouching behind a barrier formed by a large rock, Han Mingxi looked outside curiously. It seemed like there was a cauldron of voices outside, and there was also the sound of iron being hammered. What are they doing? Sickly Scholar indifferently said, they are forging weapons. He pointed to the distance where there were already many finished weapons. Third Secret looked and made a hand gesture to Yili. Yili understood and nodded. The weapons these people were forging weren't weapons that people of Jianghu or martial arts liked, but conventional weapons used on the battlefield. With so many people producing weapons, it was clear that they were forging weapons for a certain army. This isn't related to us, let's go. Sickly Scholar wasn't interested in what weapons these people were forging. The only thing he was interested in right now was the falling blue sky flower. Do you know where that surname Liang is? Han Mingxi asked. Sickly Scholar sneered. He can't run away. Han Mingxi nodded. I remember now. You poisoned him. Where's your little moth? Sickly Scholar glanced at him coldly, got up and walked to the other side. Han Mingxi shrugged and smiled at Yili before following her. And San said in a low voice, Young master, these weapons were made for a certain army in Dechu State. Yili raised her eyebrows. How do you know? And San pointed to a row of knives not far away and said, Nanjiang people are used to using short knives. West Hill people's knives have thicker bodies. As for the northern tribes, their cavalry was the strongest. They preferred long weapons or broadswords. This type of sword is commonly used by our Dechu State soldiers. Yili nodded and got up to follow Han Mingxi and Sickly Scholar. Sickly Scholar's guess wasn't wrong. This was indeed a large underground weapons factory. There were 2 large caverns that were busy forging weapons. Most of the blacksmiths were from the Central Plains, but there was also a portion of them from the Nanjiang. The 2 followed Sickly Scholar to avoid these people. They kept going down, leaving the cavern where the weapons were being forged and entering another underground cavern. Compared to the crude caverns before, this one was more like a decorated underground palace. The ground was covered with beautifully carved marble and comfortable and beautiful carpets. Are those people dead or not? As the 4 approached, a sharp voice came from inside. Yili frowned. It was the voice of the wealthy merchant, Master Liang. At this time, his voice didn't carry the same pride and disdain as before. Instead, it sounded more anxious and murderous. Don't worry, they definitely won't be able to escape. The voice of the Luo Yi tribe's chief, Lu Jiang, sounded. Why didn't you send people to kill them directly? Master Liang said with dissatisfaction, that Sickly Scholar is very scary. If we don't kill him now, we will leave behind future troubles. If it wasn't for him following me, I would have already reached the Nanjiang. But no matter what, we can't shake him off. And that person surnamed Han, he obviously knows that sickly person. We definitely can't let them. No matter the price. No matter the price? Lu Jiang laughed coldly and mocked. Who's paying the price? Do you think I don't know that those people aren't simple? Even the snakes can't do anything to them. Every man in my Luo Yi tribe is incomparably precious. How many people would we have to sacrifice to fight them? Do you think my Luo Yi tribe has as many people as your Dechu state and can't be killed? Don't forget. Master Liang angrily shouted. Lu Jiang said loudly, Don't worry, I didn't forget what I should do. But it's best if you don't order me about things outside of what we agreed on. The people inside seemed to be stunned. After a while, they heard Master Liang say, But, if those people escape, do you think they will let us go? I don't know about the other 3, but I think you should have heard of that sickly person's reputation. He's the 3rd pavilion master of the Shiling Yinwang Chamber. Why did you provoke the people of the Yinwang Chamber? Lu Jiang was clearly very angry and shouted sternly. How would I know? I had just left for a few days when he mysteriously came looking for me. I didn't even dare to let him go. That person is famous for taking revenge for the smallest grievance. What could I do? So you brought him along to the southern border. Lu Jiang gritted his teeth for a while, then snorted and said, I know. I will send people to deal with him as soon as possible. Don't worry, the road down the mountain has already been sealed. Right now, the mountain is full of poisonous insects and snakes. Even if he is the sickly scholar who is good at using poison, I don't believe he can poison an entire mountain of poisonous insects and snakes. Anyway, be careful. You must see his corpse. If you had killed them from the start, you wouldn't be in so much trouble now. Lu Jiang sneered and said, He has been following you closely. Do you think we can kill him first? Or he can kill you first? I will go order people to do things. You stay here first. Don't forget your things. If the master doesn't get what he wants, you know the consequences. Master Liang's breath suddenly stopped, and he quickly said, I know. I have already brought half of the token. Give the other half to me. Lu Jiang snorted and said, This originally belonged to our southern border. Master Liang didn't show any weakness when it came to benefits. The thing is in my hands. Only I know how to get it. That was entrusted to the Liang family by the late king of Nanjiao for safekeeping, not for you, Lu Jiang said in a low voice. Haha, so what? You also know that it belongs to the Nanjiao royal family and not yours? Master Liang laughed and said, It's already very good that I didn't give it to the Nanjiao royal family, isn't it? Didn't we offer a higher price? If you give it to the Nanjiao king, you won't get anything other than a few words of thanks. Lu Jiang sneered. Master Liang said, You want the treasure, I want the money. Isn't everyone taking what they need? So, you better quickly give me the other half of the token and stop playing tricks. This mountain has already been dug up by you. Without me, you wouldn't have found the treasure. Also, don't think about killing me to silence me. Don't forget that behind me is... Chapter 182. Master Liang's smug tone clearly made Lei Jiang uncomfortable, but there was nothing she could do. She could only say coldly, I know. I will bring it over in a moment. It is best if you don't play any tricks. Master has said that you must see the item in half a month at the latest. Otherwise, even if you have the Emperor behind you, it is useless. Master Liang's smug laughter stopped. After a while, he finally said, I know, do not worry. I know the relationship between the prince and your master. I am not someone who does not know the limits. As long as you give me the token, I promise to deliver the item to you when we reach Nanjiao. That would be best, Lei Jiang said. The sound of footsteps gradually faded away. The room finally returned to silence. Only Master Liang's slightly muffled breathing could be heard. What ado? The four stood in a hidden corner. Han Mingxi signaled with his eyes to Sickly Scholar. Sickly Scholar lowered his eyes. A dark smile flashed across his already dark face. Han Mingxi's body trembled as she looked pitifully at Master Liang, who was pacing back and forth anxiously. I wonder what kind of torture this old man will be subjected to. A short while later, Lei Jiang's footsteps sounded again. Lei Jiang, who had returned to the room, threw a small wooden box to Master Liang with a dark expression. I have already ordered people to deal with those 4 people. You have the item. In a moment, I will send someone to send you to the capital of Nanjiao. Master Liang opened the box and looked inside. He nodded in satisfaction. Very good. Since this is the case, we will not waste time. Where are my steward and guards? Lei Jiang snorted disdainfully. Your steward's legs are still weak and can't walk. As for that guard, he is even more useless. When he came down, he fell off the cliff. The people of the Central Plains are useless. You. Master Liang suppressed his anger and said, I know. Send me to Nanjiao as soon as possible. Very good. Lei Jiang nodded in satisfaction. Rest first, we will depart soon. Outside the hall, Yili glanced at Han Mingxi. Han Mingxi shook his head silently. There were indeed many corpses at the bottom of the cliff, but they were all bones that had been exposed to the wind and rain for many days. Zhang Kuei's body was not among them. Most likely, Zhang Kuei didn't slip and fall off the cliff. Instead, he was killed by these southern wilderness people. Sickly Scholar wasn't in a hurry to do anything to Master Liang. This was because the 2 southern Jiang people who were poisoned to death by Sickly Scholar had already been discovered. The originally quiet underground palace suddenly became noisy. Master Liang left under the protection of many guards. Yi Li and the other 3 could only split up to avoid being searched by the guards and prepare to leave. And San naturally went with Yi Li. Han Mingxi could only follow Sickly Scholar unwillingly. Young master, Yi Li shook her head and said, let's not leave yet. Let's go in and take a look. Without Sickly Scholar and Han Mingxi in the way, it would be easier for them to act. He carefully sneaked into the depths of the underground palace. This underground palace wasn't too big. It was only divided into 7 or 8 rooms. The 2 of them searched through all the rooms, but they didn't find anything useful. Finally, they stared at the room in the deepest part of the room. Unlike the other rooms, this room's door was tightly shut. There were 2 southern wilderness people standing guard at the door with weapons in their hands. Yili glanced at San and skillfully made a hand gesture. You left, all right? And San nodded. The 2 lightly approached the door. Then, at the same time, one on the left and one on the right, they restrained the 2 guards. And San silently twisted the other person's neck. Yili looked at the unconscious person in her hand. She frowned and placed the person in a hidden place. Looking at the lock on the door, Yili frowned. She took out a golden hairpin from her sleeve and gently twisted it. She pulled out a sharp golden needle from the golden hairpin and twisted it a few times in the keyhole. With a kacha sound, the lock was opened. Yili nodded to San, who was in the dark. She pushed open the door and flashed through the door. San vigilantly squatted in the dark and watched the movements all around. After a while, Yili flashed out from inside and locked the door again. Probably because Han Mingxi and Sickly Scholar's group attracted too many forces, Yili and San clearly felt that the number of people searching was much less than before. Along the way, they followed the markings that Han Mingxi secretly left. In less than half a quarter of an hour, the 2 saw the light of the cave entrance in front. But at the same time, there was still a distance from the cave entrance, and they could already smell the dangerous fragrance of flowers coming from outside. It was exactly the same as the fragrance of the flowers on the mountain. And San took out a few pills and handed them to Yili. Yili crushed them and put them under her nose to smell. She whispered with a smile, "Where did you get these from, sickly scholar?" Without outsiders present, and San's expression became a lot more lively. With a slightly proud smile, she said, "That's right. He has too many poisons on him. I was afraid of making a mistake, so I didn't dare take more. This is the kind of medicine he gave us before. It can last for about half an hour." Great. The two people each took a pill for a quarter of an hour, and San took the lead and walked to the cave entrance to take a look. Only then did she turn around and beckon to Yili. The two carefully flashed out of the cave entrance, but were stunned by the scene in front of them. In front of them was a vast expanse of bright red. The cave entrance was less than 2 meters below the cliff. At the bottom of the valley, there were all big red flowers blooming. Moreover, almost every flower had a red and black snake coiled around it. There were even some that climbed and wandered on the flower branches. Yili could finally understand Han Mingxi's mood when he couldn't help but curse when he came down. This damned place really made people feel a chill in their bones. However, the exit was in such a dangerous place. It wasn't arrogant of the southern border people to not have to be on guard. "Can we go over?" Yili pointed to the cliff and asked. And San looked and nodded. "It shouldn't be a problem. Be careful. If you fall, no one can save you." As long as they fell into the sea of flowers, they would be swallowed by the flowers and snakes in an instant. And San frowned. How will young master go over? He could use Qinggong to fly over, but he definitely couldn't bring someone over. Young master's Qinggong probably wasn't enough for him to fly over. The terrain here was too low, and ropes couldn't be used. If he wasn't careful, he could be bitten by the snakes that could jump up at any time. Yili helplessly sighed. This broken place really gives people a headache. However, if we can get out, this adventure is worth it. You go over first. I'll go another way. And San didn't move. Although he knew that Wang Fei was very strong, he really couldn't see any other way. It wasn't safe to stay here. Although there was no one here now, it didn't mean that no one would come. Looking at San's stubbornness, Yili helplessly waved her hand. "Forget it. I'll go over first. You stay here and watch. After I go over, you can go over. I really don't know why you guys are so stubborn." And San said in a deep voice, "We are young master's shadow guard. Naturally, we should put young master's shadow guard first." Yili rolled her eyes at the sky. "Thanks. It would be better if you had more confidence in me." It wasn't until the sky gradually darkened that Yili climbed out of the cave. Using the dagger in her hand, she climbed up the cliff. Before she climbed a bit, she would look down at San, who was following behind her, and ask, "What are you doing?" San said in a deep voice, "I'm with young master." Chapter 183. You think I want to be like this? If I had your Qinggong, I would have gone over directly. Yili looked at San in annoyance and continued to climb. San had already reached Yili's side and said, "This cliff is at least 100 zhang high. If young master wants to climb up directly, I'm afraid it will be a bit difficult." Yili laughed in a low voice. "Who said I have to climb all the way up? Just a little bit more will do. Wherever there is a protruding rock, that's it." San looked at a rock that was protruding not too far away and nodded. "I understand. Young master, I'll go over first. Be careful," Yili instructed. San nodded. Her left foot tapped on the cliff, and her entire body shot out. However, perhaps because of her previous climbing posture, she seemed to be exhausted when she flew into the air. Although she could borrow strength from the flowers on the ground, if she was bitten by a snake, they wouldn't be able to find the antidote right now. Yili cursed in a low voice, and the dagger in her left hand shot out towards San's feet. San once again soared into the air with the dagger and landed on the opposite side of the mountain with a few leaps. After losing a dagger, Yili spent a bit of effort to climb up the protruding rock on the cliff. The rock wasn't big. Even if Yili leaned against the cliff, she could only barely stand. This should be a protruding piece of a huge rock that grew in the mountains. After standing firm on the rock, Yili took a breath before taking out a rope from her bag. She fixed one end of the rope onto a sleeve arrow and shot it over, and San caught the other end of the rope and found a place to fix it. Then she shook the rope to inform Yili that she was ready. Yili also found a place to secure this end of the rope. She pulled hard on the rope before she grabbed it and slid it downwards. Young master. Seeing Yili land safely, and San quietly let out a sigh of relief. Yili patted her clothes and said, "Let's go. This should be the mountain behind the village we lived in before. We should be able to find the way out from here." And San nodded and followed behind Yili, saying, "Gongzi, I know where this place is. This is the Snake Valley." Snake Valley? Third Secret nodded and said, "There were some seniors in the Shadow Guard who had followed the prince to the southern border. It was said that there was a snake valley in the southern border that was full of red snake poison flowers. However, it was said that the prince had burned down the Snake Valley. Unexpectedly, it had recovered in less than 10 years. However, the position doesn't seem right. The Snake Valley should be in the southwest of southern border. Why is it so close to Shattered Snow Pass?" Yili shook her head and said, "Someone must have deliberately left this place. Didn't you notice that the snake venom flowers were all arranged in a row? Even the distance between each flower was almost the same. They definitely didn't grow naturally. And those snakes, even if the snake poison flower was revived, it was impossible for there to be so many scarlet snakes here. Whether it was the flowers or the snakes, they should all be planted and raised by humans." Recalling the tranquility of the sea of flowers just now, and San couldn't help but curse in a low voice. Are the people of southern border crazy? Such dangerous things. The people of southern border aren't afraid of snakes. Yili smiled and said, "Presumably, the people of southern border arranged such a snake valley here in order to hide the things in the belly of the mountain. Weapon foundry?" And San asked doubtfully. Yili smiled and said, "No, there are more interesting things. Let's leave here first. Did you see Han Mingxi's mark?" And San was squatting on the ground and looking at the things on the ground. Something probably happened to them. This mark was placed very messily. It was already nighttime. There were no footprints or anything like that at all. And San also looked for a long time before she found the mark left by Han Mingxi. Yili frowned and squatted down to look at it, thinking in a low voice, "It's been 4 hours since we separated from them. They should be able to walk about 20 li in 2 hours. Both of them know Qinggong, but Qinggong isn't used for hurrying, so let's say 30 li. Under normal circumstances, they should be 60 li away by now." Then, Han Mingxi was plotted against? Or were the two of them caught together? Sickly Scholar shouldn't have plotted against Han Mingxi. Tianyi Pavilion has a lot of spies. Someone in Yonglin City must have seen Sickly Scholar and Han Mingxi together. If something happened to Han Mingxi, Sickly Scholar wouldn't be able to explain to Tianyi Pavilion Master. And San said, Yili frowned and said, "Then, they might have been caught? And San, let's split up and see if Han Mingxi left any other marks." If something happened to Han Mingxi, not only Sickly Scholar, but also Han Mingyue wouldn't be able to explain. After all, she wanted to find Han Mingxi first, and Han Mingxi followed her to Nanjiang. If they were really caught, they could only pray that Han Mingxi hadn't been killed yet. In a hidden village somewhere in Nanjiang, Han Mingxi was lying weakly on the ground. His body was tied up tightly by ropes, and he couldn't move. Sickly Scholar, who was not far from him, was even more miserable. Not only was he chained up, but he was also covered in scars. At this time, he was coughing constantly, looking like he was half dead. Han Mingxi didn't care about his current appearance. He looked at Sickly Scholar with a smile and said, "How are you? Can you still hold on? Are you so sure that they will come to save us?" Sickly Scholar coughed softly and raised his head to ask. Han Mingxi smiled and said, "I believe that Junwei won't abandon me." Sickly Scholar snorted and said, "I believe that he will save you for the sake of the Tianyi Pavilion." Han Mingxi didn't get angry and said with a smile, "So what? He won't come to save you for the sake of you being the third master of the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce, right? Now it seems that we can only wait for Junwei to save us, right? As for you, third young master, why didn't you find someone to save us?" Han Mingxi looked at the Sickly Scholar, who was hung up from the ground with a sidelong glance. Her stomach was filled with resentment. If this guy didn't force them to find the blue falling flower, how could he be so unlucky as to fall into the hands of these people? He hadn't seen the blue falling flower yet, but it was possible that they were about to go to hell. That would really be what Junwei had said about going to the ends of the earth. Sickly Scholar coughed a few times and said, "Since you have so much confidence in Chu Junwei, why do you keep muttering here?" Han Mingshi choked and said in a low voice, "Didn't you see the place we came out of? Junwei is different from you. He doesn't have any medicine to restrain the poisonous snakes. Who knows if they can come out or not? Maybe they will be knocked out by the ghost flowers as soon as they come out of the cave. And those poisonous snakes." Sickly Scholar was silent for a moment and said indifferently, "When we came down from the cliff, Shuo Jing took some medicine from me." Seeing Han Mingshi stare at him, he curled his lips and said, "Don't look at me like that. I only found out about it after I broke up with them. He took the anti-knockout drug and the muscle-weakening powder from me, the kind I gave you on the mountain." Han Mingshi rolled his eyes. "So you could only give me one kind of medicine? It stinks to death." Chapter 184. "Don't worry, they're fine." Sickly Scholar held back his cough and said in a low voice. Han Mingshi glanced at him. "How do you know?" "That surnamed Liang couldn't wait to kill us. But Lu Jiang didn't make a move. He must be waiting for them to come. They want to catch us all in one fell swoop?" Han Mingshi frowned. Sickly Scholar said, "Don't forget that Chu Junwei was behind us the whole time. When we left the cave, they didn't follow us at all. After we left, they must have done something behind us. That's why we have to catch them. Do you think they didn't see what you left behind on the way?" Han Mingshi said angrily, "You knew they were using us to lure Chu Junwei. Why didn't you remind me?" Sickly Scholar sneered disdainfully. "Why should I remind you? At least Chu Junwei still has a chance to save us. If he doesn't come, you and I are dead. If he comes, he might die with us. So what? Pu. The window outside made two clear sounds. The two of them stopped and looked at the window at the same time. A nimble figure quickly jumped in through the window. He turned around and smiled at them. "Brother Han, don't worry. I definitely won't die with you." "Junwei," Han Mingshi called out in surprise. "Sure." Yili raised a finger to cover his mouth and blinked at him. Han Mingshi quickly lowered his voice and said, "How did you get in? This stronghold is full of ambushes." Yili smiled. "There's no such thing as a 100% safeguard in this world. It just depends on whether you can find a place to break through." "Ah, Brother Han and Third Master, you all owe me a life." Sickly Scholar snorted. "That'll have to wait until we're out of danger." Chu Junwei must have heard the conversation between him and Han Mingshi. But looking at the youth's bright smile, Sickly Scholar wasn't sure if he was holding a grudge. "All right, you're right," Yili said helplessly. He pulled out his dagger and quickly cut the ropes on Han Mingshi's body. He casually threw him a sword and said, "It's not easy to find a suitable weapon in Nanjiang. Just make do with this." Han Mingshi caught the sword and said with a smile, "Thank you, Junwei." The ropes on Han Mingshi's body were easy to get rid of, but the iron chains on Sickly Scholar's body were not so easy to get rid of. Yili spent a while to untie the iron chains. Sickly Scholar stretched his muscles and asked, "Where is your imperial bodyguard?" Yili smiled and said, "He is preparing a big gift for the Luoi tribe." Walking to the window, Yili imitated a few birdsong of different lengths. Not long after, a certain part of the stronghold suddenly became noisy, followed by even more places. In just a moment, it seemed as though the entire stronghold was bustling with noise and excitement. Yili smiled with satisfaction and said, "All right, let's go." As soon as Sickly Scholar pushed the door open, several feathered arrows were shot at them. Han Mingshi quickly grabbed him and pulled him back. Yili kicked the door. Behind them, several arrows were shot at the wooden door. Sickly Scholar angrily glared at Yili. Yili smiled kindly at him and said, "This is the thank you gift for the third leader who invited me to die with you." Sickly Scholar knew that he was in the wrong, so he snorted and didn't say anything. The archers outside were vigilantly staring at the door. With a bang, the wooden door was opened and a shadow rushed out. Whoosh whoosh. A cluster of feathered arrows was shot out. Bang bang. Two people came out of the windows on both sides of the small building. With a few whooshing sounds, several archers felt a piercing pain in their bodies and fell down one after another. Yili walked out of the door and glanced at the cloth bag on the ground that looked like a hedgehog after being shot by the arrows. She also saw the corpses lying on the ground. Her eyes darkened slightly. Let's go quickly. Zhuojing's side won't be able to hold on any longer. At this moment, the entire stronghold was in chaos and several places were ablaze. It seemed that Zhuojing had set a lot of fires, and the places he had set were not ordinary places. Not far away, a few strange bird cries could be heard. Yili led Han Mingxi and Yili in that direction without hesitation. When they passed by a spring, Sickly Scholar sneered and took something out of his pocket and threw it in. Han Mingxi saw this and his eyes flashed. He didn't say anything and quickly followed Yili in front. By the time they arrived, Third Leader was already surrounded and was clearly struggling to hold on. Yili looked around and saw that all the important people in the stronghold were present. No wonder they had sent over 10 people to guard that place. Yili thought of something she had taken from the underground palace. It was clear that in Lu Zhang's eyes, that thing was much more important than Han Mingxi and Sickly Scholar's lives. Saving two and losing one. This really isn't worth it? Yili helplessly frowned. Brother Han, can you catch that old man? Yili asked softly as she pointed at Master Liang, who was under heavy protection. Han Mingxi frowned. There are too many people around him. Also, that old man is too fat. Sickly Scholar handed over 2 things. Throw this into the air and feed this into that surnamed Liang's mouth. That's more like it. Han Mingxi nodded as he took it in his hand. Third Leader's expression was indifferent as he looked at the people wearing southern border clothing surrounding him. He mercilessly waved the weapon in his hand. Zhuojing, hold your breath. Han Mingxi's voice suddenly sounded. A dark figure flew through the air and charged into the crowd. Third Leader instantly held his breath. Southern border was different from Xiling. There weren't many people who understood the language of the Central Plains. So as soon as Han Mingxi landed, a bunch of people fell to the ground. Third Leader also took the opportunity to escape the siege and jumped onto the roof. Han Mingxi successfully landed beside Master Liang. He didn't see him lying on the ground moaning. He opened his mouth and stuffed the medicine in. He patted his face with a smile. Old man, you're finished. Lijiang was one of the few southern border people who didn't fall. Seeing the people lying on the ground, his expression was extremely ugly. He looked at Master Liang, who was crying for help. It was like he was looking at an enemy and a scourge. Damn Central Plains people. What did you do? Han Mingxi was in a good mood. The gloominess of the day had dissipated by half. He picked up Master Liang and threw him towards Sickly Scholar. He laughed. Chief Luoyi, you still have the nerve to ask us what we did? Can't you think about what you've done? Lu Jiang snorted and said disdainfully, do you think a small poison can stump our Luoyi tribe? Han Mingxi shrugged indifferently. The poison isn't mine. What does it have to do with me? Why don't you let your people stand up? Sickly Scholar carried the fat old Master Liang out. At this moment, old Master Liang's face was as black as ink, and he looked like he was on the verge of death. It was obvious that he was poisoned with a strong poison. Lei Jiang was shocked. Although he was good at using poison to drive away snakes, he couldn't tell what poison old Master Liang had been poisoned with. Moreover, this Central Plains wealthy merchant that he hated couldn't die now. What do you want? Chapter 185. Sickly Scholar said indifferently, let us go. Don't let anyone chase after us. Otherwise, I'll kill him. Lei Jiang thought for a moment and nodded. All right, but return the things you took from the underground palace to me. He pointed at Yi Li and Insan, his eyes filled with killing intent. Yi Li blinked and innocently smiled. It's not anything good. Is there a need to? I'll just return it to you. Who knows what you're writing on it? Lei Jiang stared at him suspiciously. If you don't understand, why did you take it? Yi Li smiled. If it's something important, I suggest you don't decorate it so beautifully. Isn't it obvious that you're asking people to take it? This young master's favorite thing in life is those gorgeous little trinkets. Here, I'll return this useless broken thing to you. After saying this, Yili took out something and threw it over. Lei Jiang caught it in his hands. It was a dark wooden box. On the box, there were a few twisted words that he didn't know if it was a picture or a word. It could be seen that the box originally had some decorations on it, but now it was full of uneven holes. The decorations on it were obviously taken away by someone. Lei Jiang checked the box and found that there were no signs of it being triggered. He let out a sigh of relief. The expression on his face also became better. Looking at Yili arrogantly playing with a shiny golden object in his hands, he smiled and said, "There are a few other things that I took from the table. I believe that Patriarch Lei Jiang won't be so stingy as to not even let me leave a souvenir, right?" Lei Jiang snorted. "You can leave." He obviously knew what was missing from the underground palace. It wasn't anything important, so he was too lazy to pursue it with them. Sickly Scholar dragged Master Liang and warned him, "Don't play any tricks, otherwise I'll make sure he dies without leaving any ashes." Yili and Insan had already prepared horses. Once they left the village, the four of them mounted the horses and rushed towards the northwest. It wasn't until the sky gradually brightened that they finally saw the main road. They all breathed a sigh of relief. Han Mingxi smiled and said, "Yesterday was really exciting. It's all thanks to Junwei. Let's rest here for a while." The next town was only about 10 miles away from here. They could rest there for a day. If everything goes smoothly, we'll be able to reach Nanzhao's capital in 7 or 8 days at most. Sickly Scholar vetoed. "Let's bypass the town and head straight for Nanzhao's capital." "You're not tired, but we are," Han Mingxi said discontentedly. Sickly Scholar said coldly, "Do you think we can complain about the hotel if we bring him along? Also, do you really think that Lu Jiang won't send people after us?" Han Mingxi snorted. "Who's with you? You found the person you're looking for. Go ask him where the item is. Let's part ways and go our separate ways." "Haven't we suffered enough because of you yesterday? Isn't that right, Junwei?" Yili played with the exquisite gem ornament in her hand and smiled. "It's not bad. But if we go our separate ways, will Third Master give me the reward he promised me?" Sickly Scholar's eyes flashed. "So it's best to go the same way, right? Otherwise, young Master Chu won't be at ease." Yili smiled and said, "Anyway, so many things have already happened. It doesn't matter if it happens a little more. If we give up halfway, wouldn't it mean that everything I did yesterday was in vain?" Hearing Yili say this, Han Mingxi could only nod helplessly. "I hope this young master won't be killed by you." Yili smiled and said, "Actually, Brother Han can return to the Central Plains as soon as possible. In any case, Brother Han isn't interested in what Third Master is looking for." Han Mingxi turned his head and flatly refused. This young master thinks it's fun to follow Junwei. Wherever Junwei goes, this young master will go. If we go together, then let's go together. When has this young master ever been afraid of anyone? The four of them decided to rest for a while. Sickly Scholar didn't want to wait any longer and dragged Master Liang to the side to torture him. Han Mingxi was also jealous of Master Liang and followed to watch. Yili expressed that she wasn't interested. Although Insan was interested, he definitely wouldn't show it in front of outsiders. He also stayed by Yili's side to protect her. Yili walked to a large tree and sat down. She glanced at Han Mingxi and Sickly Scholar in the distance before taking out some odds and ends from her sleeves. Among them were 2 pieces of white paper. Yili took out a sharpened charcoal pen from her bag with satisfaction and began to write and draw on the paper. Insan stood to the side and looked at his distorted and strange drawing on the paper. Didn't young master say that he didn't know these words? Did young master lie to them? Yili shook her head and smiled. "I don't really know, but other people do. However, it's a bit difficult to remember things that you don't know. Originally, I should have remembered it yesterday, but I was worried that it would be troublesome if it was discovered. Now, I shouldn't have remembered wrongly." After speaking, Yili lowered her head and continued to write and draw on the paper. She said to Insan, "Actually, I don't really know what this thing is either. However, I do recognize that box. The thing that I knocked off seems to be the imprint of the southern border Saintus, so this thing should be very important." Actually, she saw some more interesting things. However, She could understand those things, so she naturally remembered them well. After looking at it for a while, she threw it back to its original place. Of course, she didn't need to rush to write it out now. Chapter 186. Chu Jingding Manor Prince. The princess consort has sent a letter. It was already the end of April, and the sun shone warmly in the garden. Pushing open the window, the peonies in the garden were in full bloom. Immerse Xiaoyao looked at the garden outside the window and vaguely remembered that he had met Lili at this time last year. At that time, he definitely did not expect that Imo Jingqi's malicious and humiliating marriage would bring him such an extraordinary wife. Now, the people loyal to the emperor and those loyal to King Li were like fire and water in the capital. Because of the princess consort's disappearance, the doors of the Ding Manor were still closed and did not care about worldly affairs. They silently expressed their dissatisfaction with the emperor and allowed the emperor and King Li to fight openly and covertly, unlike the Ding Manor in the past that always supported the emperor at appropriate times. Bring it over. Immerse Xiaoyao retracted his gaze and turned to look at Director Imo, who was standing at the door. Feng Zhiyao stood at the door, holding a thick sealed file in his hand. He looked at Immerse Xiaoyao with a smile and said, "Ah Yao, our princess consort's sister-in-law is really heartless. She left for almost 2 months and only remembered to write a letter back." Immerse Xiaoyao frowned. He raised his hand, and the file in Feng Zhiyao's hand was sucked over by a strong force. "Where are they now?" Feng Zhiyao shook his head and said, "If the princess consort's whereabouts were so easy to find, they would not have disappeared until now." The shadow guard who received the letter was at the border of Luai tribe in Nanjiang, but the shadow guard did not see the person who sent the letter. Along the way, whether it was our people or other people, they did not find any trace of the princess consort. Speaking of which, it should not be difficult for the 5 of them to find out. Even if others do not know, our own people will know. Immerse Xiaoyao frowned and said, "That proves that there were not 5 of them along the way. Also, Li Li's disguise is very good. The shadow guards who were scattered all over the country have never seen them before, so it will be difficult for them to recognize them. Moreover, they knew the approximate locations of the shadow guards, so it would be much easier for them to avoid them." Immerse Xiaoyao opened the file, and a shiny object and a sealed letter slid out of the paper bag. Immerse Xiaoyao took the ornament in his hand. It was a gold ornament with a sunflower pattern embedded with gemstones. Feng Zhiyao was surprised. "Wang Fei actually gave you an accessory? But could it be that something was wrong?" Immerse Xiaoyao looked at the gold ornament in his hand, then placed it on the table. Then, he opened the envelope and lowered his head to look at himself. His sharp eyebrows gradually furrowed. After a while, he said, "Find someone who is proficient in Nanjiang's language." Feng Zhiyao looked at him with surprise and said, "Don't you know Nanjiang's language?" Immerse Xiaoyao frowned and said, "This isn't the same. It should be Nanjiang's ancient language." Feng Zhiyao took the letter and looked at it. The twisted and strange characters made his head swell. "It looks a bit like Nanjiang's language, but it seems I can't understand it. How does Wang Fei's sister-in-law know this kind of strange language?" Immerse Xiaoyao lowered his head to look at the other letter that was clearly short and said, "She doesn't know it. She memorized these words and then wrote them out from memory." Feng Zhiyao didn't believe it. She doesn't know this kind of twisted thing. How can she memorize it from memory? Immerse Xiaoyao faintly glanced at him. Feng Zhiyao rubbed his nose and said, "All right, we do have many people who are proficient in the current language of the southern Xinjiang, but if it's the ancient language, that seems to be something that the southern Xinjiang stopped using more than 200 years ago, right? In the past, although Nanjiang relied on the previous dynasty of the Central Plains, there were many tribes, and their language was different. It wasn't until Nanjiao was established that the current unified language of Nanjiang was implemented. Who knew which clan's language was written on this piece of paper? If it's in the capital, I'm afraid I'll have to find Elder Su. He might be able to see what this is. However, although Elder Suja was a person of virtue and prestige, he was still an official of the imperial court. If it really was an important secret, he would have to report it to Imo Jingqi. Immerse Xiaoyao frowned and shook his head, saying, "Elder Su has never had a good impression of Nanjiang. He's not proficient in Nanjiang's language. Feng Jiao's eyes turned and he said with a smile, speaking of which, Ah Yao, have you forgotten an important person? Emo Xiaoyao raised his brows, calmly staring at him, warning him not to be deliberately mystifying. Feng Jiao giggled, saying, Don't forget. Which family our princess comes from? In the entire Dechu state, is there any family more knowledgeable than the Su family? If even the Su family can't decipher this, then we can't hope to do it. Emo Xiaoyao frowned and lowered his head to look at the short family letter in his hand. He picked up the gold ornament on the table and carefully examined it. Do you think this looks like an ornament? Feng Jiao didn't understand. Is it not? Emo Xiaoyao felt the obvious scratches on the back of the gold ornament. This should be an ornament that was forcefully pried off from something. Also, do you remember which clan in Nanjiang had a sunflower as their emblem? Feng Jiao frowned and thought hard. The sunflower is also known as the sunflower. It likes warmth and is resistant to drought. Nanjiang is not very suitable for it to grow. Therefore, there doesn't seem to be any clan that uses it as their emblem. But, do you remember that there was a princess from the previous dynasty who married the leader of a tribe in Nanjiang? Emo Xiaoyao was silent for a moment. They were all people familiar with history books. Even if they didn't pay attention to these things, the previous dynasty and Dechu state were so close, so they naturally had some impression. It was the Chaoyang princess of the previous dynasty? Feng Jiao said with a smile. Yes, the rumored name of this princess had the character Kue. Then, if Li brought this out, it means that it is not a normal antique. Does this have something to do with the previous dynasty's princess? The descendant of the previous dynasty's princess. When the previous dynasty fell, this princess had already been married for 200 years, right? Who knows? Feng Jiao shook his head. Emo Xiaoyao was silent for a moment before saying, Send someone to secretly send a copy of this seal to Yunzhou. Also, if the shadow guard in Nanjiang finds Li, immediately tell her not to worry about this matter. Feng Jiao put away the letter with some surprise and said, Wang Fei has clearly done well. If there is a chance to continue investigating, she should know many secrets of Nanjiang. Why not? We can send people to help Wang Fei. Emo Xiaoyao stared at the gold ornament in his hand and said in a low voice, I don't know why, but I feel that there is a great secret hidden in that piece of paper. It's just that we don't have a clue yet. Lily doesn't know anything. It is very dangerous to rashly investigate. Feng Jiao shrugged helplessly. All right, everything will be done according to Prince's orders. Feng Jiao took the item and left. Only Emo Xiaoyao was left in the room. Emo Xiaoyao lowered his head to look at the letter in his hand again. Other than a simple explanation of what happened after entering Nanjiang, there was only a short sentence of, Don't miss me. Gently stroking the letter in his hand, Emo Xiaoyao's lips curved into a bitter smile. Yili and the other three rushed all the way and arrived at Nanzhao's capital in less than 7 days. Once they reached the capital, Sickly Scholar took Master Liang and left without hesitation. Han Mingxi was so angry that he couldn't help but curse. What does he mean? Is he going to burn the bridge after crossing the river? Yili glanced at him and said with a smile, Even if he burns the bridge after crossing the river, what can you do? The Tianyi Pavilion had people in Nanzhao, and so did the Yanwang Chamber. The Tianyi Pavilion was an intelligence organization, and the Yanwang Chamber was an assassination organization. So what if they were dissatisfied? No one could do anything to Sickly Scholar. Han Mingxi crossed his arms and looked at her. Didn't you want some medicine to prolong life, or revive the dead? If you let him go just like that, do you think he will obediently deliver it to you? Chapter 187. Yili smiled. Even if you insist on following him, he won't give it to you obediently. If he doesn't give it to me, won't he go find it himself? She didn't come to Nanjiang for Sickly Scholar and his Bailuo flower. She couldn't follow him all the time. But this kind of thing didn't necessarily have to be done by herself. As soon as they entered Nanzhao's capital, Han Mingxi took Yili to the best restaurant in Nanzhao's capital to reward himself for his hard work these days. After ordering a table full of Nanjiang food, he went back to his room to rest after eating heartily. He also said that unless the restaurant caught fire, no one was allowed to disturb him for 2 days. Yili and Insan were left speechless as they stared at the swaying figure going upstairs. Young Master Han really isn't like young Master Mingyue. Insan sighed. Yili smiled at him. Do you really think he went upstairs to sleep? I bet he can sleep until midnight tonight at most. And it was already evening. Insan frowned and didn't speak. Yili waved her fan in a good mood. Let's go. Let's go out for a stroll and see Nanzhao's night scenery. Compared to the solemn and grand Chu capital, Nanzhao's capital was much smaller. It also wasn't as prosperous as Chu capital. Everyone was wearing Nanzhang's clothing. Yili and Insan were wearing the clothing of the Central Plains and had an extraordinary bearing. Naturally, they were very eye-catching. However, Yili didn't have any interest in Nanzhang's clothing. She didn't plan on changing her attire if it wasn't necessary. Young Master. A surprised exclamation came from behind. Yili and Insan turned at the same time to see an heir who hadn't been seen for a long time. Yili was a bit surprised. She didn't plan on going to find her big brother as soon as she arrived in Nanzhao. Why are you here? Big brother is also here? An heir's face was tired. He said hoarsely, this subordinate has failed young master. Young Master Su. Young Master Su has disappeared. What? Yili was shocked. When did this happen? An heir said in a low voice, it's been more than half a month. 2 days before this subordinate arrived at the capital of Nanzhao, young Master Su had already disappeared. It's been so many days. Who knows about this? Yili asked with a frown. An heir said in a low voice, it is said that before young Master Qingchen left, he told him to come back in 5 days, so at first no one cared. On the morning of the 6th day, young Master Qingchen was still nowhere to be seen. Only then did she realize that something was wrong. My subordinates and the shadow guard of Nanjiang also secretly investigated, but there was no news. A few days ago, I already had someone send the news back to the capital. It's just that young master has been concealing his whereabouts all this time, so we didn't receive the news. Yili's face darkened. She was worried about Su Qingchen's safety. Who was Big Brother with before he disappeared? It's the Nanjiang King's crown princess Anqi. She's Princess Shixia's elder sister and the next Nanzhao King. She and young Master Qing Chun are friends. After young Master Qing Chun came to southern border, he has been staying in the princess residence. An heir said. Yili nodded and ordered, get someone to send the information about Nanzhao's capital over as soon as possible. Also, I want to see Princess Anqi. An heir nodded and said, I understand. But under what name do you plan to meet the crown princess? Even though Nanzhao was a small country, the crown princess and the princess were not people that ordinary people could meet. Yili's eyes turned and she said with a smile, Yunzhou's Chu family's third missy, Chu Luyun, young Master Qing Chen's fiancé. An heir and an heir's face stiffened, and they had a headache. Is the princess consort ruining my reputation or young Master Qing Chen's reputation? Yili's expression was normal as she looked at the two's stiff faces with a smile. What else can I do? Go to find cousin as princess consort ding? Okay, an heir, you will follow me for this period of time. An heir, secretly investigate Nanzhao and Big Brother's matters. Also, if Han Mingxi comes to find me. An heir continued, I understand. I won't let young Master Han get suspicious. That's good. You don't have to pay too much attention to him. Just try not to let him get close to me. We'll go back first. An heir, get ready. We'll visit Princess Anqi tomorrow morning. Yes. The next morning, Yili, who had been reading dossiers the whole night, opened the door after hearing a soft knock on the door. An heir looked at the woman standing at the door with a smile and couldn't help but be dazed. He had gotten used to the princess consort's male disguise and almost forgot that the princess consort was still a teenage girl. Speaking of which, it had been less than 2 months since they left the capital, but she had left a deeper impression than the previous year. Looking at the woman in front of him now, she was wearing a light yellow robe embroidered with green plum blossoms. Her hair was tied up in a small bun, and there was an exquisite and elegant 4-butterfly silver buyao on the bun. Her forehead was covered by thin bangs, which made her look even more delicate and delicate. The slender silver butterflies in her hair trembled slightly, making the girl look more charming and naughty. She was not very similar to the quiet and elegant princess consort of King Ding's mansion in the capital. An heir had to admit that the princess consort's disguise skills were not something normal people could match. Zhuo Jing? Yili raised an eyebrow and looked at the shadow guard in front of her who was thinking about something. An heir came back to his senses and said with a calm expression, "Young. Miss was right. Han Gongzi left the inn last night and hasn't returned yet." Mrs. Now? Yili waved her hand and said with a smile, "It's been hard on you. Go back to your room and rest. I'll go down by myself."
Yes.
Yili went downstairs in a good mood. An heir was waiting for her in the hall downstairs. Last night, she had come in with an heir and opened 2 other rooms. Coincidentally, an heir and an heir's rooms were sandwiched between her 2 rooms, so no one had discovered that the 2 rooms belonged to the same person. Now, they just had to check out and leave together. If Princess Anchi was interested, she would find out that they entered the city last night and stayed in this inn for 1 night. That was all. She took an heir out of the inn, and the 2 headed for Princess Anchi's Fu that was not far from the Nanjiao Palace. They waited outside the Princess Fu for a long time before the person who went to report came out to invite them in. Nanjiao's architecture was very different from the Central Plains, but the capital city was mostly the same. However, the Princess Fu was much smaller than the enormous Dingwang Fu. It was about the same size as the Yi family's Fu. The architecture of the Central Plains had many of the characteristics of Nanjiang, giving people a strange feeling. The 2 were invited to the hall. When they came in, they saw a tall woman wearing blue embroidered clothing sitting in the hall. The woman's clothing was not the usual straight and narrow sleeves, but clean and tidy sleeves. The embroidery on the cuffs and the hem were embroidered with the seal of the Nanjiao Imperial House. She was wearing a silver belt that accentuated her slim figure, making her look even more agile and valiant. Compared to her sister Princess Xixia, the #1 beauty of Nanjiao, she wasn't beautiful enough. However, her sparkling eyes made her look even more eye-catching. Seeing Yili come in, Princess Anchi's gaze carried a trace of inquiry. Yili frowned and raised her small face proudly. "Why didn't you invite us to sit down?" Chapter 188. Princess Anchi frowned. She looked at Yili and said, "Please take a seat. How should I address you?" Yili said, "I'm Chu Luyun. I'm here to look for Brother Qingqian." "Brother Qingqian?" Princess Anchi's eyes darkened. She shook her head and said, "Sorry, I don't know who Brother Qingqian is." "You're lying." Yili glared at her unhappily and reprimanded. "Brother Qingqian said that he came to Nanjiang to travel and visit his friends." "Brother Qingqian said that you're his friend. Why didn't he come here? Did you hide Big Brother Qingqian?" Princess Anchi frowned even more. She looked at the young girl's tearful face and asked, "How are you related to young Master Qingqian?" I'm his fiancé." "Boo-hoo. Brother Qingqian said that he would come back in 3 months and marry me. But now, boo-hoo, he's been out for a long time, but there's no letter. Auntie Sue is so worried. Boo-hoo. He must not want Luyun anymore. If I can't find Brother Qingqian, I don't want to live anymore." Princess Anchi's eyes darkened. She stared at the crying girl suspiciously and said, "You're young Master Qingqian's fiancé? Why haven't I heard him mention you before?" Yili looked up and looked at her bitterly. "We girls from the Central Plains care about our reputation. How could Brother Qingqian mention me in front of his friends? Here, this is the token that Brother Qingqian gave me last year. If you're really his friend, you should have seen it before. He said that he's been wearing it for many years. It's all thanks to this jade that he's been safe all these years." Princess Anchi looked at Yili with a complicated expression. She was a little shaken. She didn't know if the jade belonged to Su Qingqian, but the old network on the jade pendant was indeed the style and color that Su Qingqian usually used. Even the thread was the same as Su Qingqian's. "I'm sorry, Miss Chu. I was rude just now. It's a tough journey from the Central Plains to Nanjiang." "Why are you in Nanjiao's capital?" asked Princess Anchi softly as she returned the jade pendant to her. Yili bit her lip and looked at Princess Anchi stubbornly. "Brother Qingqian won't come for a long time. My second sister said that Brother Qingqian doesn't want me anymore. I want to find him and ask him clearly. If he really doesn't want me anymore, I'll die. An heir stood to the side, watching his master play the role of a young girl who ran away from home for love to perfection. He couldn't help but sigh in admiration. Princess Anchi was obviously having a headache dealing with such a stubborn and willful little girl. She hesitated for a moment before saying, "Young Master Qingshan was indeed a guest at my humble abode a few days ago, but he's gone now. Why don't I send someone to escort Miss Chu back to the Central Plains first? If I see young Master Qingshan, I will ask him to write a letter to Miss Chu as soon as possible. What do you think?" Yili stared at Princess Anchi in a daze. After a long while, she burst into tears. She wiped her tears and said, "I ran out with the guards. If I couldn't find Brother Qingshan, my father would break my legs. Boo-hoo. I don't want to go back. I want to find Brother Qingshan." Princess Anchi touched her forehead. Okay. Miss Chu, how about this? You stay in my mansion for a while. When young Master Qingshan comes back, you can go back together, okay?" Hearing this, Yili immediately smiled through her tears. "Thank you, Sister Princess. You're so kind." Princess Anchi summoned a maid and led Yili to the guest room to rest. After the maid left, Yili looked at an heir guiltily and asked, "Do you think Princess Anchi can become my sister-in-law? It would be troublesome if she ruined her elder brother's marriage because of this." She didn't want to become the third party in a melodramatic plot. An heir shook his head with a serious expression. "Impossible. Although the Su family doesn't discriminate against the alien race, the Su family hasn't married any one of the alien race for hundreds of years. Moreover, Princess Anchi is the crown princess of the southern frontier. Her status is noble. The Su family can't possibly allow the next head of the Su family to marry into the southern frontier. More importantly, given young Master Qingshan's personality, if he was truly interested in Princess Anchi, he definitely wouldn't call her a friend." Yili tilted her head in thought. What an heir said made sense. If she ruined her elder brother's marriage because of this, it would be a grave sin. However, she felt that this Princess Anchi wasn't bad. She had seen so many princesses. Other than Princess Changle, who was still a young girl, this Princess Anchi seemed the most reliable. If it were any other princesses, who knew how they would deal with her upon hearing that she was the fiancée of their sweetheart. She was indeed worthy of being her elder brother's friend. "Miss, what are your plans?" an heir asked. Yili smiled. "If I stay in the princess residence, won't I be able to inquire about my elder brother?" An heir replied, "But if you stay in the princess residence, it will be inconvenient to enter and leave. Mrs. movements will also be restricted." Yili shook her head and smiled. Princess Anchi wouldn't go so far as to put her friend's fiancé under house arrest, would she? Right now, it is more important to find out my elder brother's whereabouts. After all, even after so many days, the Shadow Guard still hasn't been able to figure out where my elder brother ended up. An heir lowered his head. "Ashamed," he said. "It is this subordinate's dereliction of duty." Yili waved her hand and smiled. "How can I blame you? If everything could be made clear, then there would be no such thing as a secret in this world. I only hope that my elder brother is safe and sound." Thinking of Su Qingshan, whose whereabouts were unknown, Yili could not hide the worry in her heart. Princess Anchi's residence was not large. Perhaps it was because the southern border was not strict with men and women, but Su Qingshan's room was in the same courtyard as Yili's. Yili did not conceal her whereabouts. Directly asking for the location of Su Qingshan's room, she went over. Pushing open the door, she saw that the room was very clean. Although Su Qingshan had been gone for many days, this room was still cleaned every day. Su Qingshan's belongings were all in the room. Yili looked carefully. Su Qingshan's clothes, jade pendant, folding fan, and the travel notes that he carried with him when he was bored were all in a bundle in the cabinet. On one side of the desk, there was a white porcelain tea set with blue and white flowers that Su Qingshan liked. Some books, ink, paper, and inkstone were neatly arranged in the middle of the book. Obviously, Su Qingshan had lived here for a long time. Yili went to the desk and sat down. She picked up a book and began to read. "Miss Chu, why are you here?" Princess Anchi's voice sounded at the door. Yili looked up and saw her standing at the door, frowning and looking at her. Yili quickly got up and looked at her uneasily. She said, "Sorry, I heard that Brother Qingchen used to live here, so I wanted to come and have a look. I just wanted to find a few books to read." Princess Anchi came over. Looking at the books on the table, her eyes were warm. She asked, "You also like to read?" Yili lowered her eyes and nodded shyly. She said, "Brother Qingchen is the most talented person in the world. I want to read more books." Princess Anchi nodded and said, "Young Master Qingchen also likes to read. When he has nothing to do, he always has a book with him. I only know the characters of the Central Plains. As for the books, I don't understand them." Yili put down the book in her hand and said in a low voice, "I heard Brother Qingchen mention you, Princess. You are the crown princess of Nanjiang. What you care about is important matters. It's natural that you are not interested in these poems and articles." Princess Anchi smiled generously and said, "I learned the characters of the Central Plains late. It's good enough that I can understand them. Even if I am interested, I can't understand them. Since Miss Chu likes the books in the study, you can read them. These were all bought by young Master Qingchen. They are useless here." Chapter 189. Yili nodded. "Thank you, Your Highness." "Your Highness." Yili looked at Princess Anchi and hesitated. Princess Anchi raised her eyebrows and motioned for her to continue. Yili asked softly, "I want to find Brother Qingchen as soon as possible. He hasn't written to every family for a long time. Can you tell me where he said he was going when he left? So I can take the guards with me to find him." Princess Anchi looked at her for a long time and frowned. "It's not that I don't want to tell you where he is, but I'm looking for him too." Yili guessed happily. Then, "Has he left Nanjiang and returned to the Central Plains?" Princess Anchi shook her head. "There are still many things to do in Nanjiang. He won't leave so easily. Besides, if he really left, he would have said goodbye to me. He should have at least left a message." Then will he be in danger?" Princess Anchi looked at her awkwardly. After a long time, she shook her head. "I don't think so. Master Qingchen is very smart. He'll be able to deal with anything. But Brother Qingchen doesn't know martial arts. He can't even beat Lin Han, who is by my side," Yili shouted anxiously. Princess Anchi comforted her softly. "Trust me. He'll be fine. I promise." Yili's eyes flickered and she looked up at her with hope. "Really? You promise?" Princess Anchi nodded heavily. "As the Princess of Nanjiao, I promise that he'll be fine. You just have to wait in the mansion. You'll see Master Qingchen soon." Yili nodded. "Okay, I believe you, Your Highness. But I'm going to find Brother Qingchen." Princess Anchi looked at her helplessly. "You can only stay in the capital. You can't run around. If Master Qingchen comes back and can't find you—" "I know. Thank you, Your Highness." Outside the door of the guest courtyard, the smile on Princess Anchi's face gradually faded. As he walked towards his courtyard, he turned around and asked the person following behind him, "Have you investigated Miss Chu's side?" The man beside her replied in a low voice, "Your Highness, we've checked. Miss Chu only entered the city yesterday when it was almost dark. After entering the city, they stayed at the most famous inn in the capital. This morning, after checking out of the hotel, he asked around for the location of the princess residence and came straight here. However, she didn't use Chu Liuyun's identity. Instead, she used Su Yun and Lin Han." Princess Anchi nodded. "It's not too much to use an alias when you're outside. Anything else?" The man shook his head and said, "There's nothing else. If we want to verify Miss Chu's identity, I'm afraid we'll have to send someone to the Dechu state. It'll take at least a month for a round trip." Princess Anchi shook her head. "I'm afraid we don't have the time. She must know Qingchen, and she must be very familiar with him. It was more important to find Qingchen as soon as possible. Whether it was him or not would be clear once they found him. Just send someone to keep an eye on them during this time."
Yes.
"Anything else?" The man hesitated for a moment and said, "When we went to check on Miss Chu, we found that 3 people from the Central Plains came to the inn yesterday. Their names were nothing special, but they might not be their real names." "Does it have anything to do with Miss Chu?" "It doesn't seem like it. They arrived 4 hours earlier than Miss Chu, and one of them went back to his room to rest after eating. The other two went out and came back after Miss Chu checked in. We haven't seen them yet. Then, don't bother about them first. It's normal for people from the Central Plains to enter and leave the city from time to time. This is the responsibility of the capital's guard general. It'll be troublesome if we interfere too much.
Yes.
Your Highness, the king wants to see you. Got it. I'll go to the palace immediately. Yili brought a poetry book back to her room and sat down to read it peacefully. Princess Anqi could become Nanzhao's crown princess because she wasn't a brainless princess. At least, the people she sent to keep an eye on her knew their limits and wouldn't let the guests feel offended. Yili couldn't be bothered to say anything more. If Princess Anqi really believed her completely, then she would have to doubt the crown princess's brain. Miss, Princess Anqi left the residence. An heir came in and said in a low voice. Yili nodded and said softly, that princess isn't simple. Don't get too close to her, lest you get misunderstood. An heir frowned and looked outside the door. She doesn't believe us at all. Isn't it completely useless for us to stay here and make it difficult for us to escape? Yili shook her head. Princess Anqi must know where Big Brother went. Even if she can't find Big Brother now, she clearly isn't worried about Big Brother's safety. What has Big Brother been doing since he entered Nanzhao? Can you find out? An heir nodded. This subordinate will give it to you before tomorrow. Yili nodded and frowned as she stared at the book in her hand. Her mind had already flown far away. Big Brother clearly hadn't been taken away. He had gone somewhere of his own accord. But he didn't return at the time he agreed with Princess Anqi. Big Brother didn't have any interests or enemies in Nanzhao, so he could only have gone for Princess Anqi. Even so, according to Big Brother's meticulous nature as inherited from eldest uncle, he shouldn't have left behind no clues. The clues, where were they? She threw a piece of paper on the table. Yili took out her usual charcoal pen and quickly wrote and drew on the paper. In his mind, he kept thinking about all kinds of complicated information about Nanjiang that the secret guard had sent over last night. He quickly drew a chart of the distribution of forces in Nanjiang on the paper and analyzed the relationship between the various forces in the capital of Nanzhao. After a while, a large piece of paper was filled with all kinds of simple symbols and strange characters. An heir looked strangely at the things he couldn't understand and didn't ask. Yili Gu put down the pen and looked at herself on the paper, stunned. It wasn't that she deliberately wanted to guard against anyone. In fact, what was written on this paper wasn't a secret. It was just that she had re-summarized the information she saw last night. Looking at the paper that was fluently mixed with at least 4 languages, Yili couldn't help but smile helplessly in her heart. In fact, she had been missing her previous life. She could be a quiet and perfect princess, but she didn't like it. So after leaving the capital, she deliberately avoided Imo Xiaoyao's protection and chose to travel in a dangerous way. Putting aside the chaotic thoughts in her mind, Yili stared at the paper on the table for a long time. Then she frowned and asked, why is there no news about the Saintess of Nanjiang? The clear drawings in front of her showed that they had very little information about the Saintess of Nanjiang, an important person in Nanjiang. Even if there was, it was only a few words. It was the most basic information. It was almost the same as what she knew in the capital. Only her age, name, and even appearance weren't clear. If the Saintess of Nanjiang was fighting with the crown princess to usurp power, there wouldn't be so little information. Chapter 190. An heir said, the Saintess of Nanjiang is known as the patron saint of Nanjiang. She is enshrined in the Saintess Hall 5 li outside of Nanzhao City. Except for major events and festivals, the Saintess will not leave the Saintess Hall. Usually, only the 36 maids chosen to serve the Saintess can approach the Saintess. The current Saintess, Xu Manlin, succeeded at the age of 15. In the past 8 years, she has left the temple 10 times, but each time she wore a mask. It is said that in the entire Nanzhao, except for the previous Saintess who has entered the Holy Land of Nanjiang, no one knows what she looks like. Yili shook her head. That is impossible. The current Saintess does not have the right to teach the next Saintess. Then who taught the Saintess? Who raised her when she was young? Who are her parents? And, if no one has seen the Saintess' true face, then, Who can be sure that the person under the mask is the real saintess of Nanjiang? This? An heir frowned with some hesitation. Yili picked up a pen and wrote a few lines on the paper. Carefully investigate the Nanjiao royal family and the saintess of Nanjiang. Don't miss any details. An heir replied, yes, this subordinate will immediately send people to do it. Miss suspects, the saintess of Nanjiang. Yili played with the charcoal pen in her hand and smiled. If the saintess of Nanjiang really doesn't leave the temple, how could she hook up with Li Wang? A few years ago, when Li Wang went to Nanjiang, the saintess of Nanjiang did not appear. Then, an heir's eyes lit up. They have met in private. The alliance with Nanjiang is so important that it is impossible for Li Wang to send someone to discuss it. Also, it is not easy to see the saintess of Nanjiang. Yili nodded and leaned back in her chair, thinking, saintess, this identity is really strange. Suddenly, a girl with an unknown identity, origin, and ability is pushed to one of the most respected positions in the entire Nanjiang. Are the people of Nanjiang too easily trusting? An heir shook his head and shrugged. If a random person in our to-choose state was named the crown prince, even the emperor's golden mouth and jade words wouldn't be able to convince the public. The saintess system in Nanjiang seems to be as long as the history of the Nanjiao kingdom. It wasn't that long. Before Nanjiao was established, each tribe governed their own affairs. There was no such thing as a holy maiden. Indeed, after Nanjiao was founded, the state preceptor at that time, who was also the priest of the Nanjiao royal family, chose the first holy maiden. An heir lowered his head and recalled. Yili raised an eyebrow. It sounds like the imperial tutor and the holy maiden have similar roles. So after the holy maiden appeared, Nanjiao no longer had the title of imperial tutor. An heir nodded and pondered for a moment before saying, the imperial tutor's actions aren't as strict as the holy maiden's. The responsibilities that need to be fulfilled are more or less the same. However, in the hearts of the southern border people, the holy maiden is clearly more worthy of worship than the state preceptor. Compared to an old man who likes to wander around, most people prefer a mysterious and beautiful girl. Yili agreed. In the morning, after eating the breakfast brought by the maid, Yili prepared to go out with an heir. But at the door, she met Princess Anqi, who was also about to go out. Miss Chu, are you going out? Yili greeted her with an expectant and nervous smile. Sister Princess, is there any news of Brother Qingchen? Princess Anqi shook her head regretfully. Apologies, Miss Chu. There's no news of Master Qingchen yet. Yili lowered her head in disappointment. She said in a low voice, it's okay, Brother Qingchen will be fine. Lin Han and I will also go out to find Brother Qingchen. We'll definitely find him soon. Miss Chu is new to Nanjiao and unfamiliar with the place. Where do you want to find him? Yili helplessly counted with her fingers. She said in a low voice, I'll look around. Maybe I'll find him. Princess Anqi couldn't help but smile. If Miss Chu feels bored, you can walk around the capital. If there's any place you want to go, you can ask the people in the residence to guide you. But there are many dangerous places in Nanjiang. Miss Chu, please don't go alone. Don't let Master Qingchen worry. Yili nodded. I know. Thank you, Sister Princess. You'll find Brother Qingchen soon, right? Or I'll write to Uncle Su. Brother Qingchen said that Uncle Su is the smartest person in the world. He'll definitely find Brother Qingchen. Mr. Hong Yu? Princess Anqi asked softly, startled. Yili nodded heavily. She said with a smile, Sister Princess also knows Uncle Su? Did Brother Qingchen tell you? Princess Anqi nodded slightly. She said with a smile, don't worry, Miss Chu. I promise I'll find Master Qingchen soon. The road to Nanjiang is difficult. Don't let Mr. Hong Yu worry. Otherwise, won't young Master Qingchen feel uneasy when he finds out? Yili blinked. She looked at Princess Anqi in confusion. After a while, she nodded and said, Sister Princess is right. After watching Princess Anqi leave, Yili followed her with a smile. Tell someone to follow Princess Anqi.
Yes.
In the inn, Han Mingxi walked down from the lobby with a satisfied expression, as if she had just woken up. Her languid and elegant demeanor that was different from the people of the southern border immediately attracted the attention of everyone in the inn. Han Mingxi didn't care about other people looking at him. He lazily walked down the stairs and asked the waiter, "Have you seen the two masters with me?" The waiter felt dizzy. He quickly said, "Master, the two masters left early this morning. By the way, there is a letter for Master." The waiter ran to the counter and took the letter from the innkeeper. He handed it to Han Mingxi. Han Mingxi raised her eyebrows. She took the letter and glanced at it. She couldn't help but frown. Junwei is really too mean. How can he leave me behind and run away? Humph, there is no one in this world that I can't find. He crumpled the letter into a ball and hesitantly put it in his sleeve. He walked out angrily, leaving the guests in the inn who hadn't come to their senses. At this time, in a restaurant owned by the great Chu people opposite the inn, Yili, dressed in men's clothing, was leisurely sitting by the window drinking tea. The person beside her had changed from an heir to an san. Looking out of the window, he happened to see Han Mingxi, who was grumbling resentfully, walking out from inside. Yili was amused as she watched Han Mingxi walk into the crowd and gradually disappear. She asked, "What did Han Mingxi do yesterday?" And San said in a deep voice, "Master Han went out in the middle of the night 2 days ago. He didn't come back until 10 past midnight. He should have gone to the Tianyi Pavilion stronghold in Nanjiao. We and the Tianyi Pavilion have never offended each other. Master, do you need to investigate?" Yili shook her head and said, "No need. It's fine as long as he doesn't hinder us. Pay attention to the news from Ansi. Don't let Han Mingyue come to find us without us knowing." And San nodded. Strictly speaking, Master didn't scheme against the Tianyi Pavilion. It was Master Han who followed us to Nanjiang. The Tianyi Pavilion's master shouldn't make trouble for us. That's not necessarily true. Does the Tianyi Pavilion send news regularly? Yili asked. Chapter 191. Yes, I've compared the information I got from the Tianyi Pavilion with our own information. There's not much difference, and San replied. Yili nodded in satisfaction. That's good. If there's someone who can deceive the Shadow Guard and the Tianyi Pavilion at the same time, then it wouldn't be an injustice for us to be fooled. When we return, ask the Tianyi Pavilion for information on the Saintess of Nanjiang. I told Han Mingxi that I want the hidden luo flower. If we ask for information on the Saintess of Nanjiang now, Han Mingxi won't be suspicious. Yes, young master, there's news on Sickly Scholar's side. I'm afraid Master Liang won't be able to hold on any longer. Are you? Yili frowned in annoyance. She didn't expect to receive news of her brother's disappearance as soon as she arrived in Nanjiao. As a result, not only could she not get any advice or help from Su Qingchen, she also had to find Su Qingchen's whereabouts in the shortest amount of time possible. This made her a little busy, but she couldn't ignore Sickly Scholar. Master Liang isn't a martial artist after all. Besides, with Sickly Scholar's methods, I'm afraid even a martial artist won't be able to hold on for long. Before, Sickly Scholar was afraid that he wouldn't have any clues if he killed Master Liang. Now that the token was in his hands, even if Master Liang didn't say anything, he could always find some clues if he put in some effort. And without the token, Master Liang wouldn't be able to explain himself. Where are they? Outside the city. Yili thought for a moment and said, "It's more important to find my brother first. Let the Shadow Guard keep an eye on them. If there's no other choice, help the people of the Luai tribe rescue Master Liang first. We can't let him tell Sickly Scholar the way to obtain the hidden luo flower. At least not before we have the time. If we can't, we can only snatch it. If we can't, we'll destroy the hidden luo flower. We can't let Sickly Scholar get it." And San said hesitantly, "The hidden luo flower might be able to cure the prince's illness. If it's destroyed, that's why we have to try our best to get it. But if we really can't get it, we can't let Sickly Scholar get it. Who do you think the first person he'll deal with?" Yili asked with a smile. "Prince? What's the reason for this? He's going to Nanjiang alone, and didn't use the power of the Yanwang chamber. Why did he go to Nanjiang alone this time? He went alone to Nanjiang, and didn't use Yanwang chambers. Why he went to? Is it for him to send him alone? Did he go alone to go? The other two heads of the King of Hell's Pavilion must have disagreed. Back then, Sickly Scholar had almost lost his life due to his serious injuries. Even now, he was barely hanging on. How could he not hate him? However, Yama's pavilion and Ding King's palace made an agreement to never offend each other. So he can only rely on himself. Thinking of sickly Scholar's resentful eyes when he mentioned the hidden Luo underworld, Yili couldn't help but shudder. Because of this, the thought of killing sickly Scholar first popped up in his mind. However, this thought only flashed through his mind. Whether it was because of sickly Scholar's identity or other reasons, she couldn't kill him now. At least, he couldn't die in the hands of Princess Consort Ding. This subordinate understands. I will never let sickly Scholar get the hidden Luo flower. Somewhere in Nanzhao, in a secret palace, there were marble floors and pillars carved with exquisite patterns, exquisite gold ornaments and utensils inlaid with gems of various colors, and countless luminous pearls replacing the light formed by candles. Nanjiang's most precious hibiscus muslin was wrapped in layers. Behind the muslin, an elegant man in white was sitting quietly reading a book. Under the soft light of the luminous pearls, the man's perfect side face was suffused with a faint luster, and his whole person seemed more quiet and peaceful. The heavy stone door was pushed open from the outside, and a slender and graceful woman slowly walked in. Different from the traditional Nanjiang costume, the woman wore a bright yellow wide robe with phoenix patterns, and the hem of the robe dragged on the ground. Her black hair was casually tied up, decorated with gorgeous multicolored gems, and a delicate golden mask covered her entire face. The delicate mask had a strange charm, making the eyes under the mask even more dazzling. The woman walked gracefully, looked at the man in white, and whispered with a smile, "Young Master Qingchen, you really don't want to look at me? As long as you nod, I will take off my mask and let you see." Su Qingchen put down the book in his hand, sighed softly, looked up and asked, Are you more beautiful than those on the Chu capital beauty map?" This seemed to be the first time Su Qingchen responded to this question. The woman was a little surprised. "You like the women of the Chu state? I have also heard of the Chu capital beauty map. Which one do you like more? Is it the number 1 beauty of the Chu state, Suzuiti? She seems to have died?" Su Qingchen smiled faintly. "Suzuiti is indeed a good beauty. If you are not as beautiful as her, then don't look at her." A trace of anger flashed in the woman's eyes, but she quickly calmed down and said with a smile, "Young Master Qingchen is too picky. As far as I know, your little fiancée is indeed good-looking, but she doesn't seem to have reached the level of absolute beauty." Su Qingchen lowered his eyes, hiding the strange look in his eyes. The woman took Su Qingchen's silence and said with a snort, "Speaking of which, that Miss Chu is indeed deeply in love with young master. She actually came all the way to Nanjiang with only one guard. Miss Chu really doesn't seem like a woman of the Central Plains." "Where is she?" Su Qingchen asked. Yesterday she came to our Crown Princess Anqi's residence with great fanfare. Since Princess Anqi and young master are good friends, I'm sure she will take good care of young master's fiancée." The woman covered her mouth with a smile. "Young Master Qingchen, are you really not going to consider my proposal? After this is done, you and I can share the world." Su Qingchen's expression was calm, and he said softly, "If this one guesses correctly, 3 years ago, Miss also made a promise to share the world with the Chu State's princely." The woman flicked her sleeve disdainfully and said with a smile, "Mo Jingli? How can he compare to young master? No, I believe that in this world, besides Prince Ding, there is no one who can compare to young master. Only, Prince Ding is already crippled. Young master is the most perfect man in this world, and the most compatible man with me." Su Qingchen shook his head. "I am truly sorry. The Su family has a rule of marriage. The descendants of the Su family are not allowed to covet beauty, wealth, or power. This one can only marry one person in this life. Miss, it is useless to keep me locked up like this. Nanzhao's capital is not big. It is only a matter of time before someone finds this place." The woman half leaned on a marble pillar and giggled. "Aren't you afraid that I will kill you? In this half year, how many bad ideas have you come up with for Anqi? How many things have you ruined for me? Don't you like women from the Central Plains? Am I not more like a woman from the Central Plains than Anqi?" Su Qingchen shook his head and lowered his head to continue reading, saying, "If you wanted to kill me, you would have done so long ago. Also, what good would it do you to kill me?" "That's right." The woman sighed helplessly. "Killing you is really troublesome. The Su family of the Central Plains, and maybe even the Ding Crown Prince's residence will make trouble for me. Also, our Crown Princess will definitely fight me to the death. But, although I can't kill you, I can lock you up here. That way, you can't ruin my business. Without you, it won't be long before Anqi, that arrogant and annoying woman, dies a horrible death. Of course, there is also your cute fiancé." Chapter 192. You're not allowed to touch her. Su Qingchen seemed to be enraged and warned her coldly. You really care about her? The woman looked at Su Qingchen strangely. "Why would you like a little girl who hasn't grown up yet?" Su Qingchen said indifferently, "As long as she's my fiancée, I'll naturally care." The woman stared at her. "You mean no matter what kind of person she is, as long as she's your fiancée, you'll care about her?" Su Qingchen smiled. "Isn't that natural? Since she's my future wife, if I don't care about her, who else would I care about?" "You. Fine. I'll show you what I'm capable of." The woman sneered and glared hatefully at Su Qingchen before leaving in a huff. Hearing the heavy stone door close again, Su Qingchen slowly put down the book in her hand. Her handsome eyes drooped. "Fiancé. Miss Chu." Lear. Late at night, Princess Anqi's residence was quiet. Only the light in the study was still faintly lit. Princess Anqi's handsome face showed a trace of tiredness as she frowned at the man in front of her. "Is there still no news from Qingchen?" The man shook his head and said in a low voice, "No." Princess Anqi said anxiously, "What's the matter? Does she still not believe that we really think Qingchen is missing?" The man nodded. "It's very likely. Although we've sent people to look for young Master Qingchen, it's very likely that she still thinks we're working together with young Master Qingchen to put on a show for her. I hope nothing bad happened to Qingchen." Princess Anqi closed her eyes tiredly and rubbed her aching forehead. "We've spent so much effort and finally made the situation better. If we fail now, I'm afraid." "Father." The man frowned. "His Majesty still doesn't believe the princess?" Princess Anqi smiled bitterly. "Father is just over 40 years old and is in the prime of his life. Even if he believes us, he won't support us. He needs another force to suppress me, the crown princess. If it wasn't for father's secret favoritism, they wouldn't have failed again and again in the past 6 months. Every time they were about to catch that person's tail, she would escape. Now even the commander's seal is in her hands. If we can't get the commander's seal back, nothing we do will be of any use." Princess Anqi didn't understand why her wise father would side with that woman. But he couldn't just stand by and watch as she tried to do something bad to Nanzhao. This was her responsibility as the princess of Nanzhao and the crown princess. "Can you find out where young Master Qingchen is?" Princess Anqi asked. "If you can't find out, then ask Qingchen to withdraw first. This is Nanzhao's own matter. We cannot implicate him." The man shook his head and said, "I'm afraid not. Although we receive news from young Master Qingchen from time to time, it is young Master Qingchen who gets in touch with us. We have no idea where young Master Qingchen is." "Damn it," Princess Anqi cursed. "Assassin!" A shout came from outside the courtyard. Princess Anqi stood up abruptly. The man beside her pulled out his sword and opened the door. But soon he came back and said with a frown, "They are going to the guest courtyard." Princess Anqi said, "There is only Miss Chu in the guest courtyard. Why would the assassin want to find her? Let's go and have a look." Then she rushed out of the door and went to the guest courtyard. The man quickly closed the door and followed her out. The study was quiet again. The window in the corner moved slightly. Then it was pushed open. A black figure quickly flipped in. A pair of clear and beautiful eyes were revealed under the black mask. The black-clothed person quickly walked to the desk and flipped through the files on the table. After looking through them once, she didn't seem to have found anything. She then went to the bookshelf behind her to look for something. There weren't many books in Princess Anqi's study. Most of them were official documents, and most of them were written in Nanjiang. After a long time, a file hidden in the most inconspicuous corner of the bookshelf fell into the eyes of the person in black. What caught her attention was not the file itself, but the seal on it. It was a sunflower-shaped seal. The eyes of the black-clothed man flashed, and a thin blade appeared at his fingertips. He quickly tore open the sealed file. She glanced through it quickly. A faint smile appeared in her beautiful eyes. After resealing the file, she restored the study to its original state. Then she flipped out of the window. In the guest courtyard, Princess Anchi was stopped at the door by an heir when she arrived with her guards. An heir looked at the people in front of him with a sullen face and said, "Princess, it's so late. What's the matter?" Princess Anchi said, "Assassins just broke into the guest courtyard. Is Miss Chu all right?" "Assassins?" An heir frowned and said, "I've been keeping watch outside. No assassins came in." Princess Anchi was surprised. Her guards would never lie. Besides, she did see several black figures enter the guest courtyard from a distance. Why did Miss Chu's guards deny it? "Guard Lin, Miss Chu is young Master Qingchen's fiancée. If she is hurt, I can't explain it to young Master Qingchen. Is it true that no one broke into the guest courtyard?" An heir's face was unhappy. He said in a low voice, "When there was a quarrel outside, there were several black figures approaching, but they were scared away by my hidden weapons. Some of them should have been injured, but they definitely didn't enter the guest courtyard. Miss Chu's reputation is important. Princess, please be careful with your words." Looking at an heir's gloomy and serious expression, Princess Anchi finally understood why this guard insisted that the assassins didn't come in. The women of the Central Plains were much stricter about their reputation than those in the South. "My apologies, Guard Lin." It was this princess's slip of the tongue. She waved her hand to let the guards behind her leave to continue searching for the assassins. Then she turned to an heir and said, "Did the commotion just now scare Miss Chu? Why didn't she come out?" An heir said indifferently, "Miss Chu lives in the inner courtyard. Perhaps she didn't hear the commotion outside." Princess Anchi frowned and said, "Since it's inconvenient for Guard Lin, this princess will go see Miss Chu in person. It's not good if she's scared." "No, Princess Sister, what's the matter?" An heir was about to refuse when Yi Li's voice came from behind. Yi Li was wearing a large cloak. Her beautiful hair was draped over her shoulders. There was a faint sleepiness and confusion in her eyes. The one holding the lamp beside her was really a maid sent by Princess Anchi to serve her. Princess Anchi smiled and said, "It's nothing. Just a few thieves broke in. Did they disturb Miss Chu?" Yi Li tilted her head and smiled peacefully. "Don't worry. Lin Han's martial arts are very good. He's been protecting me all this time. Lin Han, right?" An heir lowered his head and said respectfully, "That's right. Don't worry, Mississippi. The assassins didn't come in just now. I've already beaten them away." Princess Anchi looked at Yi Li and saw that there was nothing wrong with her. Then she nodded and said, "In that case, Miss Chu should have a good rest. I'll send people to look elsewhere in case any fish escapes the net." "Yes, thank you for your hard work, Princess Sister." Yi Li smiled obediently. Watching Princess Anchi leave, the smile on Yi Li's face gradually disappeared. She turned to the maid beside her and said, "Let's go back." The maid nodded and followed Yi Li to the inner courtyard. As soon as they entered the room, they felt their backs go numb and they fell to the ground. An heir quietly appeared at the door. Yi Li raised her eyebrows and looked at him, asking, "What's the matter with the assassins?" An heir said in a low voice, "There were indeed assassins. They should have come from Mississippi." An heir walked into the room and pulled out a black-clothed figure from under the bed. A total of 3 people came. They underestimated the enemy too much and were discovered by the princess's guards. After being injured by my hidden weapon, they immediately left. This one was the most seriously injured and was caught by me. Chapter 193. Yi Li squatted down and looked at the person on the ground. He looked like a typical person from Nanjiang. Even though he was wearing black night clothes, he didn't hide his features. They shouldn't be Princess Anchi's men. Chu Luyun shouldn't have any enemies in Nanjiang. Who dares to chase after the princess and provoke her? An heir frowned and said, Could it be that someone else knows about our identities? Yi Li shook her head. That's not right. If someone really knows about our identities, I'm afraid it won't be as simple as these few low-level assassins. What happened tonight is more like a demonstration or a provocation to Princess Anqi. A demonstration? A provocation to Princess Anqi? Is it because of young Master Qingchen? An heir guessed. Yi Li nodded and said thoughtfully, I think so too. In Nanjiang, the only person related to Chu Liuyun's identity is Big Brother. But what's the use of such a provocation if it doesn't hurt? In comparison, it's more useful to capture me to threaten Big Brother. If Big Brother is in the other party's hands. With these assassins' abilities, they can't take anyone away from the princess residence even if I'm not here. They haven't even touched the guest house, but they have already alerted the princess residence's guards. Such assassins can't even kill people, let alone kidnap someone alive. Miss, can you guess who did it? Yi Li smiled lightly and said, I didn't know at first, but I'm quite confident now. Tomorrow, I'll try out your interrogation skills and verify my theory. An heir knew many interrogation experts, such as the romantic and elegant Feng San Gongzi Feng Zhiyao, the leader of the hidden guards who was responsible for training them, and the Dingguo Wang Fu's steward Uncle Amo, who was solemn and silent but actually had a good heart. However, an heir never knew that the originally delicate princess consort Ding's master was also an expert in this area. Many times, the four of them couldn't help but secretly guess how badly the Yi family treated the princess consort back then to distort a rich young lady from a prestigious family like this. It would take a lot of effort to bring that unlucky assassin out of the princess residence. At this moment, the princess residence was under martial law, and the price of bringing him out might not be proportional to the rewards they would receive. So an heir didn't plan on waiting until tomorrow. He prepared to pry open that unlucky guard's mouth on the spot. The guest courtyard wasn't small, and Yi Li's room was located in the innermost part of the courtyard, so as long as they didn't shout, even the people outside the courtyard wouldn't notice anything. Of course, the shadow guard who had been hiding in the princess residence would not allow anyone who was not supposed to get close to the guest courtyard. After the unlucky assassin was forced to drink a cup of herbal tea mixed with tendon softening powder, he couldn't scream even if he wanted to. Thus, a few strange scenes appeared in the elegantly decorated room. On one side of the couch lay a maid from Nanjiang who had fallen into a deep sleep. Sitting at the table was a charming young girl who was writing and drawing under the lamp. A few steps away, however, there was an inhumane interrogation going on under torture. An heir's face darkened as he broke the assassin's left leg bone. That assassin's face was deathly pale and he was drenched in sweat, but he still clenched his teeth and refused to speak. Because of the restrictions of this place, he couldn't use too troublesome and bloody methods. This made an heir's face become more and more ugly. Even after Yi Li finished dealing with her own matters and raised her head, an heir still couldn't get the assassin to spit out a single useful sentence. Instead, that assassin almost bit his tongue and committed suicide. Is it no good? Do you need help? Yi Li stood up and asked. An heir's mouth twitched. He shook his head and said, There's no need to trouble young miss with this kind of thing. No problem. Even if you break another leg, he still won't confess. Then I'll break all the bones in his body. An heir coldly stared at the assassin. Yi Li shook her head and said with a smile, When you break half of his bones, he'll be dead. What idea does young miss have? Yi Li leisurely walked over. She squatted down and smiled at the assassin on the ground. She softly said, Do you understand Central Plains language? Don't worry, I won't be as rough as him. The assassin vigilantly stared at the charming young girl with a kind smile. As an assassin, his intuition told him that this pretty and cute young girl in front of him was the truly dangerous person. Don't be afraid. I won't break your bones like he did. I plan to remove all the bones in your body, Yi Li said with a smile as she looked at the assassin who was staring at her with vigilance. Don't be afraid. I won't break your bones like he did. Let's start from your fingers. Her slender white hand held the assassin's left hand. With a kacha sound, a knuckle on the left index finger strangely twisted. Yi Li continued to move downwards. Another crisp sound was heard, and her entire index finger was twisted. The assassin's jaw was dislocated, and he couldn't even cry out. He could only make vague ah sounds. Yili looked at him. Nod your head whenever you want to, but don't wait until I remove all the bones in your body before you nod. By then, it'll be too late. Katja. Yili's expression was calm, but her hands were moving in an orderly manner. And it was this kind of calmness that was more frightening than an heir's threatening words. When Yili's hand moved to the assassin's right hand, the assassin, who was breathing weakly, finally nodded his head with difficulty. Yili raised an eyebrow and looked at an heir from the corner of her eyes. I thought it was some tough bone, but it's just like this? An heir silently wiped the sweat from his forehead. He also felt that this assassin was a bit too useless. But at the same time, he felt that his master wasn't scary because of her methods of torturing people, but rather that terrifying calmness. If it was him, he would also be scared. Very good, but you can't joke with me. Otherwise, the consequences will only make you regret living in this world. Yili sincerely looked at him and advised. Yili nodded in satisfaction. Very good. Then tell me who your master is. Waving her hand to indicate for an heir to close his jaw, Yili asked. A trace of fear flashed through the assassin's eyes. He looked at Yili and opened his mouth, but didn't say anything. Yili wrinkled her brows and thought for a bit before saying, If you're worried about your life's safety, I can guarantee your safety. Moreover, after I finish the matters in Nanjiang, I can give you a sum of money to let you change your surname and start a new life. The assassin's eyes flashed, and there was a bit of hesitation on his face. Yili saw this, and the smile on her face became even more sincere. Your information is very important to me, so, as long as you give me true information, I promise to fulfill the promise. However, I think you should also understand that you're not the only one who knows the information. If you don't say it, others might say it. At that time, I'm very sorry, I can only... Seeing the assassin's nervous expression, Yili said with a smile, No, I won't kill you. When I came to Nanjiang, I passed by a valley that was filled with blood-red flowers. There was also a small snake under each of the flowers. At the time, I was thinking, with so many snakes, what would they eat to grow? What do you think? Snake? Snake Valley? No. It wasn't only the people of the Central Plains who were afraid of a place like Snake Valley. The people of Nanjiang weren't afraid of snakes, but other than the snake tamers, there was no one who wasn't afraid of thousands of uncontrolled poisonous snakes. Chapter 194. Then, your answer? I say, what do you want to ask? Yili turned to look at an heir and raised an eyebrow in satisfaction. In reality, she didn't get much information from the assassin. After all, it wasn't likely that the person sent out as cannon fodder was a core figure. However, at least it confirmed part of Yili's guess. At the same time, they locked onto the target of Su Qingqian's disappearance. However, Su Qingqian's exact location was still unknown. Since it was confirmed that Su Qingqian's life wasn't in danger for the time being, Yili's worried heart finally relaxed. Junwei. Junwei. There was a burst of cheerful shouts on the noisy street. The passers-by all looked over and saw a handsome man wearing white clothes of the Central Plains, waving happily at a youth not far away. Yili turned back and saw the man in white running towards her. She sighed helplessly and raised a smile. Brother Han, I haven't seen you for a few days. How have you been? Han Mingshi looked at Yili with bewitching eyes and hidden bitterness. Junwei, I came thousands of li to Nanjiao with you, and you actually abandoned me. You are so cruel. Yili unconsciously shivered. Although the passers-by didn't understand what he was saying, seeing his appearance and hearing his tone, they unconsciously looked at them strangely. Brother Han. Yili couldn't help but rub her forehead. She did her best to control her temper before smiling. Brother Han has finally slept enough? How rare. Han Mingshi didn't feel guilty at all. He moved closer and smiled. No, I woke up a long time ago and strolled around the city. However, I didn't see Junwei. Junwei, why didn't you tell me about this? Wouldn't it be safer for me to go with you? Yi rolled her eyes at him. I'm just looking around. I'm not going into a dragon's den or a tiger's den. Han Mingxi shrugged and said indifferently, even if Junwei wants to go to a dragon's den or a tiger's den, I will go with you. He didn't forget to wink at Yi. His eyes were saying, look at how good I am to you. Yi frowned. She did not expect to run into Han Mingxi. However, it was obviously very inconvenient to bring Han Mingxi along now. If he didn't bring him along, given Han Mingxi's personality, he really didn't know what kind of mess he would make the Tianyi Pavilion make in the capital of Nanzhao. Yi lowered her head and thought for a moment. Then she said, Brother Han, let's talk somewhere else. After finding a room in a tea house and sitting down, Yi said, Brother Han, I have some matters to attend to. It might not be convenient for you to follow me. Han Mingxi rested his head on the table and glared at Yi as he complained. Why didn't you say it was inconvenient when you asked for information about the Tianyi Pavilion? Now you want to dump me? You're abandoning me after seducing me. Yi was speechless. She had paid a corresponding price for the information about the Tianyi Pavilion. She didn't ask him to work for free. Seeing that Yi didn't want to talk to him, Han Mingxi bit his nails and said with a smile, what can happen in such a small place like Nanzhao? Didn't Junwei come to find the Netherworld flower? I have the information about the Saintess of Nanjiang. Otherwise, it would be Sickly Scholar. I also know the whereabouts of Sickly Scholar, but he seems to be targeted by another group of people. Junwei, it's better not to provoke them. Otherwise, young Master Qingchen is missing, right? Han Mingxi tilted his head and smiled innocently. The Tianyi Pavilion's information is indeed worthy of its reputation. Yi sighed softly. Han Mingxi said with a smile, does the Tianyi Pavilion sell information? There are only a few major events in the capital of Nanzhao recently. What are we doing? So, Junwei, which one do you want to deal with first? Yi stared at him. After a long while, she said softly with a smile, do you know where young Master Qingchen is? Han Mingxi's eyes flashed, and he said with some dissatisfaction, you want to find him first? Junwei, I thought the Biluo flower and the Netherworld flower were more important to you. Yi said, you can take them at any time. If you don't find them, they may not be intact. Han Mingxi looked at her with his chin propped up. You want to know about young Master Qingchen? Tell me, what's your relationship with him? Yi shook her head and said with a smile, you don't know about Su Qingchen. Otherwise, you wouldn't be negotiating with me now, right? Han Mingxi snorted and stared at her with a gloomy face. Then do you want the information about the Saintess of Nanjiang? If you don't, I'll burn it. He's my elder brother, Yi replied. Han Mingxi frowned. He looked at her up and down for a long time and asked, brother, are you Su Qingbai or Su Qingyan? In terms of age, you are more like Su Qingyan, but in terms of character, you are like Su Qingbai. But no one said that the young masters of the Su family know martial arts. Yi said with a smile, it seems that the information of the Tianyi Pavilion is not so reliable. The third young master of the Su family, Su Qingfeng, is now serving in the army. Brother Han, don't you know? Han Mingxi stared at her suspiciously. Are you really a member of the Su family? Yi smiled but didn't say anything. She neither admitted nor denied it. Han Mingxi walked back and forth in the room with some irritation. From time to time, he muttered to Yi to vent his dissatisfaction. You lied to me. You are not looking for the Netherworld flower. You are looking for Su Qingchen. Junwei, you lied to me. Young master. An heir's voice came from outside the door. The door was pushed open from the outside. An heir glanced at Han Mingxi and said to Yi, young master, there is news. Yi nodded. Come in and talk. Inside the room, Yi and an heir both looked at Han Mingxi. However, the usually tactful young master Feng Yu was unexpectedly oblivious. It seemed that he didn't understand the other party's desire for him to leave. He sat in the chair and began to eat the snacks. Yi waved her hand helplessly at an heir and said, forget it. Just say it. An heir nodded and said in a low voice, Princess Anqi came into contact with young Master Qingchen today. Or, someone related to young Master Qingchen? Yi frowned. What do you mean? An heir said, when Princess Anqi returned home today, Her body was stained with some special incense. The people of Nanjiang don't like incense, so they don't have any special research on incense. But they don't know that in the Central Plains, even the same incense has many different things to pay attention to. For example, among the young masters of the Su family, other than the third and fifth young masters who don't use incense, the second young master is used to using plum incense. The fourth young master prefers orchid incense. As for young master Qingchen, because he goes out all year round, the incense is personally made by Madame Su. She adds some medicine that is beneficial to the body, so he has a very light medicine box. It's definitely not easy for ordinary people to distinguish, and it's even more difficult to imitate and make it. Yili frowned. Where did Princess Anqi go? The palace. This morning, the king of Nanjiao summoned Princess Anqi. After leaving the palace, Princess Anqi went straight back home. An heir said with certainty. Han Mingxi smiled curiously. Young Master Qingchen can't be in the palace, right? An heir hesitated and said with a frown, the chance of Princess Anqi seeing young Master Qingchen with her own eyes is not high. From the time Princess Anqi entered and left the palace, other than when she had an audience with the king of Nanjiao, she was basically in our line of sight. It's impossible for her to see young Master Qingchen, except when she had an audience with the king of Nanjiao. And, after returning home, Princess Anqi sent more people to secretly look for young Master Qingchen. Yili shook her head and said, the king of Nanjiao should know elder brother's identity. If something happens to elder brother in Nanjiao now, it won't do him any good. So, elder brother's chance in the palace is not high. That incense should be a message from him to tell us that he is safe now. Chapter 195. And San didn't understand. Since young Master Qingchen is not in the Imperial Palace, why would the message come from the Imperial Palace? Why would the perfume that young Master Qingchen carries with him be in the Imperial Palace? Naturally, it is because the other party may be someone from the Imperial Palace. Even if they are not, they are people who can freely enter and leave the Imperial Palace. Han Mingxi lazily shook his head. That's not right. Junwei. In Nanjiao, other than the crown princess, no one can freely enter and leave the Imperial Palace. This includes the other princesses. Of course, even this princess is not in Nanjiao right now. Yili glanced at him. It is not difficult in the open, but not in the dark? In the dark? The two asked in unison. Yili frowned and asked, have you found the traces of those assassins? And San nodded, we found them, but we were a step too late. They were killed on a small mound 2 li outside the city. Their bodies were left in an abandoned cave. Speak carefully. When we were looking for their bodies, we found them in a secluded cave 10 miles west of the city. But there were no signs of fighting at the scene. Although that place was not far from the capital, the road was very difficult to walk on and there was nothing around. Even if those assassins were running for their lives, they should not have forgotten that direction. But fortunately, the hidden weapon that injured them had a tracking medicinal scent. It took an entire night to find them. They should have been killed not long after they left the city. Then the bodies were thrown into that cave. Yili rubbed her brows and asked thoughtfully, in which direction were they killed? East. In other words, they originally wanted to go east, but after they were killed, the mastermind threw the bodies to the west? What is there in the east? Yili stood. Give me the map of Nanjiao's capital. And San lowered her head and took out a thin piece of paper from her chest and carefully spread it on the table. Han Mingxi looked over and pursed his lips. The entire map of Nanjiao's capital? Junwei, you didn't need to go to the Tianyi Pavilion to gather information, did you? Yili smiled and said, the more information we have, the safer we will be. I have always cherished my life. Besides, I don't believe that the Tianyi Pavilion can't come up with this map. This was not a defensive map, but an ordinary map of the layout of a city. He took out a charcoal pencil and circled the Imperial Palace on the map. He went to Princess Anqi's mansion, the place where Su Qingchen went missing, the place where her body was dumped, and the place where she was killed. He looked up and asked, how do you feel? Han Mingxi pointed at the drawing and said, if you don't look at the location of the corpse and the princess's residence, these locations seem to be very close to the Saint Lady Temple. Speaking of which, if I hadn't seen this picture, I wouldn't have known that the Saint Lady Temple was so close to the palace. The Saint Lady Temple was located on a mountain 5 miles east of the capital. But if you count the distance from the palace and the journey up the mountain, it would take at least 10 miles to get to the Saint Lady Temple. Yili pointed and lowered her head. Ordinary people only think that the road from the Imperial Palace to the Saint Lady Temple is not close. Moreover, the Imperial Palace is built on a mountain. The mountain behind the Imperial Palace is steep and dangerous. It is difficult to get to the Saint Lady Temple from the mountain, and it will take more time than leaving the city directly. So basically, no one has paid attention to it. In fact, the distance between the Imperial Palace and the Saint Lady Temple is less than 2 miles. Tunnel? And San asked, "Haven't we seen the ability of the people of Nanjiang to dig tunnels on our way here?" Yili asked with a smile. The two of them thought of the almost hollowed-out mountain at the same time and fell silent. What did the king of Nanjiao, who founded the country, think? Why did he still build the Imperial Palace? Han Mingshi asked in confusion. In the history of the Central Plains, only temporary palaces or side palaces would be built on mountains. The real imperial palaces were all located in the center of the capital city. It not only showed the nobility of the royal family, but also showed the majesty of the people. Yili replied without much seriousness, "The customs are different." Han Mingshi could tell at a glance that she was just being perfunctory. He glared at Yili unhappily for a long time and found that the other party was still immersed in her own thoughts. Han Mingshi's face suddenly darkened. After coughing twice to attract the attention of the two people in the side room, Han Mingshi smiled and said, "You suspect that young Master Qingqian is in the Saint Lady Temple? As everyone knows, the Saint Lady of Nanjiang is as pure as ice and as pure as jade. The Saint Lady Temple does not allow men to enter, let alone harbor men. If people know that you think so, believe me, you will be drowned by the anger of the people of Nanjiao." Yili said indifferently, "Is it because everyone knows that it is more likely?" Han Mingshi rolled his eyes. "Then how can young Master Junwei enter the Saint Lady Temple, which is as guarded as the Imperial Palace, and find young Master Qingqian who is hidden somewhere? If we can't find him and you are found, we will really be killed by the people of Nanjiao." "I don't plan to enter through the Saint Lady Temple," Yili said. Han Mingshi's face was full of shock and admiration. "So young Master Junwei plans to brave the Nanjiao Imperial Palace? Brother Junwei, even if the Nanjiao Imperial Palace is not even a third of the size of our Chu capital, can you not look down on them? Don't forget, there are no poisonous snakes in our Chu capital's Imperial Palace, but Nanjiao might not." Yili smiled faintly. "You speak as if young Master Feng Yu has never been to the Imperial Palace. Who was it that bragged a few days ago that someone had visited the imperial palaces of various countries?" Han Mingshi was speechless. For some reason, she began to silently regret bragging about her past romantic history to Junwei when she was bored during the journey. "Even if you go in and find young Master Qingqian, how will you bring him out?" Han Mingshi asked. "As far as I know, young Master Qingqian does not know martial arts at all." Yili frowned and said, I have to think about it carefully. They definitely couldn't force their way in. Even if the Shadow Guard was strong enough to snatch someone from the Nanjiao Imperial Palace, it would be troublesome to deal with the aftermath. If outsiders knew that the people who made the move were from the Ding Imperial Palace, it would be even more troublesome. Seeing her frown in deep thought, Han Mingshi smiled cheerfully and said, "How is it? Do you need help?" Yili looked at Han Mingshi and shook her head. She and Han Mingshi were only partners. Last time, Han Mingshi had taken many risks with her. This time, no matter what, she couldn't drag him into the danger. Han Mingshi looked at her with a smile and said, "Don't be so quick to refuse. In any case, the Tianyi Pavilion is a business. As long as Junwei can afford it, we can do more than just collect information." Yili's heart was moved. She looked at Han Mingshi and asked, "What does Brother Han want?" Han Mingshi smiled proudly and said, "Aromatic Elegance Pavilion. I want 20% more." Yili said, "I thought the Tianyi Pavilion liked real money? You should know that no matter how much it is, whether it's the Su family or me, we will give it to you." Han Mingshi looked at her with grievance and said, "Junwei and I are friends. How can friends take advantage of others' difficulties? Friends? Yili faintly raised her eyebrows and said, the Tianyi Pavilion is not good at these things. I don't want to trouble Brother Han. Junwei, you are too polite. Han Mingxi smiled and said, although the Tianyi Pavilion is not good at these things, we are very familiar with the Nanjiao Imperial City. Compared to our friendship, don't you think the Tianyi Pavilion is more trustworthy? Yili frowned and pondered for a while before saying, then I'll have to trouble Brother Han. After this, I will be responsible for the Tianyi Pavilion's losses. Of course, the Fragrant Elegance Pavilion's 20% share will remain the same. Chapter 196. Like I said, Junwei is treating me like an outsider. Han Mingxi sighed helplessly. Yili smiled faintly and lowered her head without saying a word. She wondered if she needed Princess Anqi's help. In the sparkling light of the pearls, the heavy stone door was opened. The woman in the golden dress was no longer as leisurely as she used to be. Her messy footsteps seemed to contain great anger. Su Qingchen, who was resting with his eyes closed, opened his eyes and looked back at the woman who came in a hurry. He frowned and said, "What's wrong?" The woman seemed to be furious. She swept all the Celadone teacups on the table to the ground with a wave of her sleeve. The sound of the teacups breaking was crisp and pleasant. "Speak. How did they know you were here?" Su Qingchen shook his head and said faintly, "I can't even get out of the door. How could I know this? What's wrong? Did someone make trouble for you? How could you not know? You must have spread the news. Tell me, what did you do?" The woman tried to control her anger and asked. Su Qingchen shook his head and sighed. "You think too highly of me. I'm just a weak and helpless scholar, not a hidden expert. If you have time to think about this, why don't you think about who you have offended recently?" The woman snorted and said, "How could I offend anyone? Besides Anqi, the only person I have offended in my life. Haha, it seems to be your delicate fiancée. I told you not to touch her," Su Qingchen said in a low voice. The woman sneered, "Don't worry. Your precious fiancée is fine. But it doesn't mean she will be fine in the future. Last time, I just wanted to scare her. Speaking of which, it seems that her bodyguards are good." Su Qingchen didn't care. "Are you talking about her bodyguards? The daughters of the Central Plains always have a few bodyguards when they go out. It's not a big deal. You trust her. Why don't we continue to see if her bodyguards can protect her? Who knows, maybe they'll fall in love with each other. Don't girls love to play the hero and save the beauty?" Su Qingchen glanced at her. "If you have the time, why don't you tell me what happened to make you so angry?" At the mention of this matter, the woman's face, hidden under the mask, could not help but twist. She said with hatred, "Someone threw the bodies of those assassins outside the Saint Lady Temple." Su Qingchen was a little surprised, but she soon relaxed her brows. "Even so, it's not a big deal. Just leave it to the Nanjiao royal family or the authorities to deal with it." "How can this be?" The woman cried out. "Don't tell me you don't know. If someone knows that a body has been dumped in the Temple of the Saint Lady, Anqi will definitely take the opportunity to search the Temple of the Saint Lady." "Humph. Don't think that I don't know that she has long wanted to reach into the Saint Lady's hall. But she's not qualified." Su Qingchen reached for a book and opened it. She said, "You haven't told me yet. If people know that the corpse was found in the Saint Lady's temple, the people of Nanjiao will doubt the sanctity of the Saint Lady of Nanjiang. Most importantly, if you had another year or two, you could have pushed this matter to the Dechu State or West Hill. But now, you're not even ready to go to war with the Dechu State." The woman's eyes darkened. She stared at him gloomily and said in a low voice, "You know too much. Aren't you afraid that I'll kill you?" Su Qingchen nodded slightly. "Because you want to know more from me, don't you?" "That's right," the woman admitted directly. "If you hadn't secretly helped Anqi, she wouldn't have been able to defeat me. Since you can help her, you can help me, can't you?" Su Qingchen shook his head. "I won't help you. I'll make sure you're willing." The woman sneered. Su Qingchen put down the book again and looked at her with pity. "You're not suitable for this at all. None of the previous saints of Nanjiang are suitable. Even if you're smarter than them, you're still not as good as Princess Anchi when it comes to governing a country. A trace of anger flashed in the woman's eyes. She said coldly, "Who says I'm not suitable? You admit that I'm smarter than Anchi, don't you? You're just better at scheming than her. But a country can't be governed by scheming. What's more, you can't even do scheming. So what? At least you're in my hands now, aren't you?" The woman said proudly. Su Qingchen smiled and said nothing. Looking at Su Qingchen's calm face, the woman suddenly felt very angry. She said with hatred, "You're looking down on me." Su Qingchen frowned. "I'm not looking down on you. I just don't agree with what you're doing now." "I know. You're looking down on me." The woman screamed. "What do you know? Do you know what kind of life Anchi has lived since she was a child? What kind of life I've lived since I was a child? Why? Why is she born as the crown princess and the crown princess? Why does everything belong to her? You're the saint of Nanjiang. You're also respected by tens of thousands of people," Su Qingchen said. "Ha. Respected by tens of thousands of people? I haven't seen my mother since I was 3 years old. I've been alone since I was 5 years old." He was not allowed to talk to the maids, not allowed to go out to play, not allowed to cry, not allowed to see outsiders, and not even allowed to be tempted. "When I'm 28, I still have to go to that damn Holy Land. Who wants to go to that damn place? Nanjiao is mine. Everything is mine." The woman screamed as if she had suddenly broken down. Su Qingchen shook his head. "The life of the saint of Nanjiang is indeed very pitiful, but I don't think that includes you. No one has ever restricted your actions, right? Otherwise, how could you have the chance to meet King Li and become enemies with Princess Anchi? Even the new saint of Nanjiang had already appeared 2 years ago. You just killed her. The saint of Nanjiang can be 28 years old at the latest. But in fact, most saint of Nanjiang abdicate before 25. Anchi even told you this?" The woman stared at him. "It seems that she really trusts you." "I'm friends with Princess Anchi." "Humph." The breakdown just now seemed to be an illusion. Or it could be called acting. The woman regained her elegance in a moment. "Good friend. I'll send the heads of your friends and your fiancé to you." With that, the woman flicked her sleeves and left. Su Qingchen frowned as he watched the stone door close again. The saint of Nanjiang was gradually losing her mind. As long as everything went according to the plan he and Princess Anchi had discussed in the past 6 months, they would definitely be able to take down the saint of Nanjiang and King Li's forces in Nanjiang without shedding a drop of blood. So now was the time to think about how to escape. Since he had achieved his goal beyond his expectations, there was no point in staying here any longer. And the later it would be, the more dangerous it would be. The stone door was pushed open from the outside again. Su Qingchen said indifferently, "Miss, is there anything else?" "Miss, it's nothing." "Brother Qingchen, it's me." There was a crisp laughter at the door. Su Qingchen was startled and quickly turned to look at the door. Beside the half-open stone door, a pretty girl in a light yellow dress was looking at him with a smile. "Li-er." Yili stepped forward and looked around the stone room with a smile. "Big brother, it seems that you're doing well here." Su Qingchen looked at her with a smile and said, "Li-er, why are you here?" Yili winked at him and pointed at the half-open stone door. She smiled and said, "Come and welcome Master Qingchen." Chapter 197. Su Qingchen looked at the door thoughtfully. "There's someone else outside?" Yili pulled Su Qingchen and smiled. "Let's not talk about this for now. Let's go. It won't be good if that woman comes back." Su Qingchen nodded. "Li-er is right. Let's talk about it outside. For example, I suddenly have a fiancé." The smile on Yi Li's face froze. After a while, she laughed and said, "Brother Qingchen, remember to call me Chu Luyun when you go out. It's easy to be suspicious if you don't even know your fiancé's name." Su Qingchen tidied up a little and took a few things from the table. He then followed Yi Li out of the stone door. Outside the door, an heir was waiting with 2 unfamiliar shadow guards. When they saw Yi Li and Su Qingchen come out, they heaved a sigh of relief and said, "Young Master Qingchen is indeed here. Miss, let's go out of the palace." "How's that woman?" An heir said, Princess Anshi brought people to the Saints' Hall according to our information. With those corpses, that woman will definitely have her eyes on her because of Princess Anshi. They must be waiting for you at the Saint Ladies' Hall. Yili nodded in satisfaction. What about the palace? An heir said, young Master Han will create chaos in the palace, and we can take the opportunity to leave. Yili nodded. I hope Han Mingxi is reliable this time. An heir lowered his head and laughed. Young Master Han asked San to pass the message. I guarantee that he won't disappoint you. I hope so. The two shadow guards protected Su Qingchen, while an heir and Yili stood in front and behind. Sure enough, as they had expected, a long tunnel connected the Imperial Palace and the Sacred Maiden Hall. Although the mountain behind the Imperial Palace was not completely hollowed out like the Luai tribe, there were still a few stone rooms connected to the tunnel. Su Qingchen was under house arrest in one of them. With Yili and the others leading the way, the group naturally quickly arrived at the exit of the Imperial Palace. Su Qingchen frowned and asked, Where's the exit? An heir said with some regret, It's in the Nanzhao King's bedroom. That saintess of the southern wilderness is so crazy. Yet Nanzhao King still dares to build a secret passage in his bedroom. Isn't he afraid of being killed by the saintess of the southern wilderness? Su Qingchen wasn't surprised and said faintly, under normal circumstances, Southern Border's Holy Maiden will be absolutely loyal to Nanzhao King. An heir was puzzled. Then what's going on now? Yili interrupted. Let's talk about it when we get back. An heir hurriedly complied and walked forward to carefully push open the mechanism of the secret passage. The heavy boulder was moved away, and an empty palace appeared in front of everyone's eyes. When the group of 5 walked out, an heir then sealed the mechanism of the secret passage again. The 2 secret guards were the first to dash out, just in time to pull in the 2 guards at the door who had come to investigate after hearing the commotion. The 2 guards didn't even have time to groan before they quietly fell to the ground. Su Qingchen glanced at Yili, who had a calm expression, and his eyes moved slightly. He reached out and pulled Yili to his side. Yili raised her head and smiled faintly at him. Big brother, let's go out quickly. Su Qingchen nodded. Coming out of Nanzhao King's gorgeous bedroom, they didn't encounter too many guards along the way. A few guards were also taken care of by the 2 shadow guards and an heir. Because the route had been planned in advance, it didn't take much effort for the group to get out of the palace and stand at the secret place that Han Mingxi had prepared for them in advance. Junwei, this young master is back. Why haven't you come out to greet me? The group didn't have time to sit down to drink water and catch their breath. Han Mingxi's incomparably coquettish voice sounded outside the courtyard. Just as he turned around, a shadow fell from the top of the wall and pounced in the direction of Yili, young Master Han, and San, who was following behind him, broke out in cold sweat and hurriedly called out. Su Qingchen and an heir beside Yili also stepped forward to block Han Mingxi's figure. Su Qingchen's smile was warm and cold. Young Master Han, what are you doing? Only then did Han Mingxi see clearly that the person standing beside Su Qingchen wasn't his beloved younger brother Junwei, but a delicate young girl wearing a light yellow robe. Yili hurriedly retreated behind Su Qingchen, only sticking out half of her face. Big brother Qingchen. Han Mingxi saw that the young girl seemed to have been frightened by him and couldn't help but feel ashamed. He, young Master Fengyu, had dominated the Sea of Flowers for more than a decade. When had he ever done such a disrespectful thing to a beautiful young girl? In order to maintain his image at the banquet, Han Mingxi immediately put on young Master Fengyu's signature smile and raised an eyebrow behind Su Qingchen. In a gentle voice he said, Miss, I'm really sorry. This one is Han Mingxi. Did I scare you just now? This humble one apologizes for his mistake. Yili hid behind Su Qingchen and said crisply, No need. But young master, please don't do this in the future. After all, there are differences between men and women. Han Mingxi's mouth twitched. He really wasn't a lecher. He just thought that the person standing beside Su Qingchen was Junwei. Okay? But then again, where did his younger brother Junwei go? Zhuojing, where did my younger brother Junwei go? You're all here. Why is he missing? Yili couldn't help but look up at the sky. Who's your younger brother? An heir's face darkened. He silently looked at Han Mingxi's unforgiving expression and said, "Young master didn't say that he would come here." Han Mingxi was dissatisfied. "Why didn't Junwei come here?" An heir said, "This is the place that young master asked young master Han to prepare for young master Su." Han Mingxi glanced at the elegant young master Qingqian unhappily. He didn't know why he felt a little sour in his heart. He said sadly, "But I prepared it for Junwei." An heir couldn't help but roll his eyes. "Our young master has a place to live." Han Mingxi curled his lips and said, "How can the place you live be more comfortable than the place I prepared? If I knew that Junwei didn't want to live here, I wouldn't have bothered so much." After saying that, he didn't forget to glare at Su Qingqian. Su Qingqian saw this and smiled faintly. "Thank you for your trouble, young master Han." Han Mingxi snorted and waved the folding fan in his hand. "Seeing that you are Junwei's elder brother, this young master won't argue with you. Where is Junwei? Since he isn't with us or you, where is he now?" An heir quickly glanced at Yili and said, "When we came back, young Master Chu received a message and left first. He said that he had something to deal with first. He will come back later, and we will meet." "I see." Han Mingxi was skeptical. Perhaps it was because an heir's slightly serious face was very trustworthy. But in the end, Han Mingxi snorted and left. Seeing Han Mingxi disappear in the yard, Su Qingqian turned around and smiled at Yili, "Little sister, it seems that many things have happened on your way to Nanjiang?" Yili smiled at Su Qingqian to please him. With Su Qingqian's intelligence, it wasn't difficult for him to guess that Chu Junwei and Chu Luyuan were the same person. Su Qingqian smiled at Yili's uneasy look and nodded. "It just so happens that you and Big Brother haven't seen each other for almost a year. Let's go in and have a chat?" Yili helplessly blinked and moved aside. She softly said, "Big Brother, please." Chapter 198. In the study, Su Qingqian sat behind the desk and calmly looked at the guilty-looking Yili. Yili stood at the side with her head lowered. Her eyes darted around, and she would secretly look up at Su Qingqian from time to time. Just like how the previous generation of the Su family was most afraid of Su Hongyu, the current generation of the Su family was most afraid of Su Qingqian. This included Yili, who was often in the Su family when she was young. "Big Brother." Seeing that Su Qingqian was just calmly staring at her without saying anything, Yili softly called out in grievance. Su Qingqian looked at her pitiful appearance and sighed. "I haven't seen you for a long time. Lear, you've grown up. You actually know how to act pitiful in front of Big Brother?" Yili blinked and pouted. "Big Brother, I'm not acting pitiful. Why are you angry?" Su Qingqian raised his brows and said, "Lear, I don't know why Big Brother is angry." Yili shook her head. Su Qingqian asked, "Who is Chu Junwei? Who is Chu Luya?" It was a waste of energy to beat around the bush with Big Brother. Yili lowered her head in defeat. "Big Brother." Su Qingqian pointed at the chair in front of him and said, "Sit down. Sit down and tell me slowly." Yili sat down obediently on the chair. Then, she recounted everything in detail, from being schemed against by Yiyu in the capital to finding Su Qingqian in Nanjiang. When Yili finished, she realized that her mouth was dry. She looked up and saw Su Qingqian handing her a cup of tea. Yili smiled slightly and hurriedly took a sip. After she drank the tea to moisten her throat, Su Qingqian looked at her and said lightly, "I won't tell you about being schemed against by Yiyu first. Why did you specially go to Guangling to find Han Mingxi? You even brought him to Nanjiang?" Yili softly said, "I didn't want to alarm the people in the capital, so it wasn't convenient for me to use King Ding's shadow guard. Han Mingxi came here of his own accord. I didn't bring him here." Su Qingqian looked at her with a faint smile and said, "It's a good idea not to alarm the people in the capital. However, have you asked about the relationship between Han Mingyue and Prince Ding? What if outsiders find out that you, the future imperial consort, went to the Tianyi Pavilion under an assumed name? Most importantly, if Han Mingyue really wanted to investigate, would he not be able to find out your identity? What will you do if he makes things difficult for you?" Yili looked up at Su Qingqian's still smiling handsome face. "I left Dark 4 to monitor the Wind and Moon Pavilion. If Han Mingyue comes back, he will inform me immediately. Moreover, I didn't ask the Tianyi Pavilion to do what was really important to me. I just want the Tianyi Pavilion to distract the Shadow Guard. Su Qingqian nodded and said, You've crossed the line. Then, who told you to provoke Sickly Scholar? Big brother. You also know Sickly Scholar? Yili asked. Although Sickly Scholar was famous, he was a member of the Jianghu. Yili was curious that Su Qingqian knew this person. Su Qingqian looked at her indifferently. Ling Taihan, the first master of the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce, is my friend? Yili was speechless. She looked up at the sky silently in her heart. She was just thinking about how to scheme against Sickly Scholar, but Sickly Scholar was still a dangerous existence. Big brother, if I do something to Sickly Scholar, it won't affect your friendship with Pavilion Masterling, right? Su Qingqian raised his eyebrows and said, What do you want to do to him? Yili frowned and told him about the Biluo flower in detail. After listening to her, Su Qingqian was silent for a moment before saying, So, you're worried that he will harm Prince Ding if he gets the Biluo flower, so you want to get rid of this hidden danger first. At the same time, you think that the Biluo flower may be helpful to Prince Ding's illness, so you want to get the Biluo flower too? You're really considerate of Immerse Xiaoyao. It's obvious that you really think of yourself as the future princess consort. Father and uncle have always been worried that you're too calm, but I'm sure they don't want to see you place too much importance on Prince Ding. Hearing Su Qingqian say this, Yili suddenly felt a bit embarrassed. Big brother, what are you saying? Immerse Xiaoyao has always been good to me. Since I'm already married to him, I naturally want him to be well. Could it be that Big brother wants him to die quickly and your poor cousin to become a widow? Seeing Yili's forceful and confident appearance, Su Qingqian smiled. He coughed lightly and said, Forget it. You should be careful about Sickly Scholar. As for Ling Taihan, I'll talk to him. I won't let the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce make trouble for you. Thank you, big brother. Yili smiled. Su Qingqian looked at her with a half-smile and said, No need to thank me, cousin Li. Let's talk about my fiancé now. That's right. I've already sent a pigeon back to the capital to inform the people who should be informed. Ah, cousin, how can you be like this? No. How can you be so fast? Yili felt a headache when she thought about how many letters she would receive because of this matter and how she would be lectured by her eldest and second uncles in the future. Su Qingqian smiled and said, Actually, when I heard that my fiancé was coming to Nanzhao, I had someone send a letter back. Or do you think that Big Brother won't be able to send a letter outside because he's under house arrest? There should be a reply in at most 5 days. Lu Yun Mimi. Yili couldn't help but want to hold her head and groan. Big Brother was really too bad. Capital. Prince, a secret letter from Yunzhou. In the study, Chief Steward Imo quickly walked in with a letter sealed with a black flame. Immerse Xiaoyao, who was sitting in the study reading, suddenly raised his head. He took the letter from Chief Steward Mo's hands and quickly read it. His expression gradually became serious. The air pressure in the study seemed to freeze. Chief Steward Imo asked worriedly, Prince? Immerse Xiaoyao lowered his head and paused slightly. The letter in his hand had been unconsciously crumpled into a ball. Closing his eyes slightly to calm the shock and anger in his heart, Immerse Xiaoyao refolded the ball of paper in his hand and said in a heavy voice, Tell Feng Jiao to come over, and ask Sir Shan to come over as well. Prepare. I will enter the palace in a moment. Chief Steward Imo frowned. Ever since the Wang Fei's incident, the prince had not entered the palace. It seemed that the news from Yunzhou was something major. Even though he was worried, Chief Steward Imo could only respond in a low voice to the prince's orders. This subordinate will go now. A short while later, Feng Zhiyao and Shun Yang appeared at the door of the study. Feng Zhiyao raised an eyebrow and said with a smile, What orders does Prince have? Immerse Xiaoyao reached out and handed over the slightly crumpled letter. He said in a heavy voice, Take a look. Feng Zhiyao's handsome brows rose slightly. He understood Immerse Xiaoyao and naturally understood the meaning of his expression and tone. He did not speak further and took the letter to sit down on the side. From Yunzhou? Is this old Mr. Qing Yun's handwriting? Immerse Xiaoyao nodded silently. Feng Zhiyao's expression also became slightly serious. He had originally hoped that the Su family would have someone knowledgeable to help translate what Yili had sent back. He hadn't thought that it would alarm Mr. Qing Yun. Anything that could attract the attention of this old mister was not a small matter. Feng Zhiyao sat on the side and read the letter. Xinyang looked strangely at Imo Xiaoyao and asked, "Prince, is something the matter? Or are you not feeling well?" Xinyang was a doctor and did not like to ask about these things. Chapter 199. Imo Xiaoyao shook his head and said, "Originally, Mr. Shun was supposed to depart for Xiling in a few days. But now I'm afraid I'll have to ask Mr. Shun to postpone it." Xinyang frowned and said, "Prince's plan has changed?" Imo Xiaoyao sighed and said, "It's too late. Mr. Shun, I need to make a trip to Nanjiang." "What?" Xinyang said loudly. Even Feng Zhiyao, who was sitting at the side, could not help but be stunned and frown worriedly. Xinyang did not give Imo Xiaoyao a chance to speak at all. He angrily shouted at Imo Xiaoyao, "Prince, are you joking? Your body is much better than last winter, but don't forget that this is only in comparison to last winter. Nanjiang's climate is wet and rainy. It's not suitable for your body at all. And, you know it yourself, the cold poison in your body has already gone out of control last winter. Although you try to suppress it, your body will only get worse and worse. If you change places rashly, the cold poison may even go out of control again." Feng Zhiyao was somewhat puzzled. "The warm climate in Nanjiang, isn't it more suitable for Prince's body?" Xinyang rolled his eyes in annoyance. "If that's the case, why did we go through so much trouble for so many years? Wouldn't it be better to just let Prince go to Nanjiang to recuperate?" "Mr. Shun," Imo Xiaoyao frowned and looked at Xinyang seriously and said in a low voice, "I must go." The low and firm voice announced the speaker's unwavering will. "Reason?" Xinyang said angrily. "Prince, please give me a reason why you don't care about your own life. As a doctor, I at least have the right to know why my patients are sending themselves to their deaths." Imo Xiaoyao sighed. He was full of respect for this elder who had pulled him back from the road to the netherworld again and again. Unfortunately, he had to go against his wishes, because, "If I don't go, we can only atone for our sins with our deaths in the future." Xinyang was shocked. For Imo Xiaoyao to say such words, the matter was not something he could stop, or he could not stop it at all. Xinyang seemed to have aged 10 years in an instant and said sadly, "Prince, even if you go to Nanjiang, with your current body, there is nothing you can do." The body that was affected by the cold poison was extremely sensitive to changes in the weather. The north was dry. Even if it was not rainy, Imo Xiaoyao's body would be extremely weak and ache, not to mention the rainy south. Imo Xiaoyao wouldn't have it any better in the past than in the winter. Imo Xiaoyao lowered his eyes. "I know you have a way. Mr. Shun, I can't go to Jiang to go to Nanjiang like this. I want to stand up and appear in southern border in one piece. Do you understand? To Nanjiang." Feng Zhiyao also suddenly stood up and said, "Prince, things have not reached that stage yet. Why don't we go to Nanjiang first, and then we can talk about it when the time comes." Imo Xiaoyao looked at him calmly and said, "You should know that if I can't go to Nanjiang, it will be too late when things really reach that stage." Feng Zhiyao lowered his head and gripped the letter in his hand, speechless. Xinyang snorted and said, "I don't care what stage things have reached. There is no way. I am a doctor, not an assassin. I will not let you do that." Imo Xiaoyao ignored him and said lightly to Feng Zhiyao, "Go and prepare. I will go to the palace." Feng Zhiyao looked at him and did not know what to say for a long time. After a long time, he could only say in a low voice, "Yes, Prince." Imo Xiaoyao turned his hand, and the wheelchair moved out of the door. When he passed by Xinyang, he said lightly, "Mr. Shun, I want to see the medicine when I come back. I won't give it to you." Xinyang finally abandoned the gentleness of a doctor and shouted loudly. Unfortunately, the person he was shouting at had already gone out. Feng Zhiyao looked at Xinyang, who was so angry that his face was red, and followed him out with the letter in his hand. Xinyang was so angry that he could only stare blankly in the study. After a long time, he shouted, "Are the men of the Imo family sick? Can't this world live without you?" Feng Zhiyao looked back at the study and quickly caught up with Imo Xiaoyao. Emo Xiaoyao asked indifferently, "What do you want to say?" Feng Zhiyao was stunned for a moment and could only shake his head and say, "I have nothing to say. Prince, please allow Feng San to do as he pleases." Emo Xiaoyao frowned and said, "You need to stay and deal with the matters in the capital." Feng Zhiyao raised his eyebrows, and there was a heroic spirit between his brows that he didn't usually have. "Prince, Feng San is a soldier. His life's ambition is to move unhindered on the battlefield, not to control the Shadow Guard and gather intelligence." Emo Xiaoyao was stunned, and he turned back to look at Feng Zhiyao. Too much time had passed, and he had somewhat forgotten. When they were still naughty children, the red-clothed Feng Zhiyao stood in front of him and said that in the future, he would become a peerless general who would win every battle. Then, Feng Zhiyao gave up the Feng family's luxurious life at the age of 13 and followed him through life and death. Perhaps if it were not for that matter back then, Feng Zhiyao would have already become a famous general of his generation as he wished, and would not have been forced to stay in the capital like he was now, using the image of a dissolute and unruly young master to appear in front of the world, just to conceal his identity as the commander of the hidden guards. After a long time, Emo Xiaoyao said in a low voice, "All right, if they really, then they should know about your relationship with the Ding Palace. I will make other arrangements for the Shadow Guard." At that time, Feng Zhiyao had anonymously followed him on the battlefield. Not many people knew about it, but it wasn't that there weren't any. Feng Zhiyao was overjoyed. "Thank you, Prince." Emo Xiaoyao smiled faintly and replied, "I should be the one thanking you. Also, send someone to send a letter to Li on a fast horse. Be careful of Shu Manlin." Nanzhao capital Yili helplessly looked at the hostile Han Mingxi and the indifferent Su Qingqian in front of her. "Young Master Han." Han Mingxi snorted and turned his face to Yili with a smile. "Lu Yun Mimi, there's no need to be so polite. Since you also know Jun Wei, you can just call me Brother Mingxi." Yili looked at him speechlessly and swallowed back the words she wanted to say. Han Mingxi saw that the little beauty was ignoring him and shrugged his shoulders regretfully. He looked at Yili and said, "Speaking of which, Lu Yun Mimi and Jun Wei are really similar. Actually, Jun Wei isn't young Master Qingqian's younger brother, but Lu Yun Mimi's brother, right? Aren't both of you surnamed Chu?" Yili silently wiped her sweat in her heart. Brother Qingqian is really Jun Wei's elder brother. Han Mingxi rolled his eyes and blinked innocently at Yili. "Then Jun Wei's name is definitely not real? Lu Yun Mimi, can you tell Big Brother? What is Jun Wei's name?" Yili's heart was filled with bitterness. She secretly regretted asking Han Mingxi for help in the first place. She looked pleadingly at Su Qingqian, who was leisurely drinking tea. Su Qingqian raised her eyebrows and said indifferently, "Su Qinglu? Qinglu? Good name. It's very compatible with Jun Wei. Unlike some people, it's a waste of a good name." "No. Su Qinglu is not one of the 5 young masters of the Su family," Han Mingxi murmured. He quickly reacted and glared fiercely at Su Qingqian. Su Qingqian raised her eyebrows and said, "Who told you that he's one of the 5 sons of the Su family?" Han Mingxi lowered his head and thought. He didn't think so. After thinking for a moment, he raised his head and looked at Su Qingqian with a strange and conflicted expression. If you looked carefully, you could see a little bit of contempt. Yili looked at Han Mingxi helplessly. "What are you thinking of now?" Everything was done by the Shadow Guard in the Tianyi Pavilion. Princess Anqi walked to the side and sat down. She glared at Su Qingqian and said with dissatisfaction, "You didn't do anything, but you made a mess in the palace. Father just summoned me to the palace to question me. He suspects that I did it." She was prepared to do that, but didn't someone else beat her to it? Why did father still suspect her? Su Qingqian raised his eyebrows and said, "You know that the king of Nanzhao suspects you. Why did you still come here?" Princess Anqi raised her eyebrows disdainfully and said, "Those good-for-nothings can only keep up with me if I want them to. I don't want them to be unable to keep up with me, even if they break their legs." "Princess, why are you in such a hurry to come here?" Su Qingqian asked. Yili watched from the side and sighed in her heart. Princess Anchi came here in such a hurry because she was worried about her brother's safety. But he just asked her indifferently, "Why are you here?" Did he expect the girl to say that she was worried about his safety? Princess Anchi was stunned. She glanced at Ili and raised her eyebrows, saying, "Can't I come here for no reason? This princess has to come and see if my friend and military advisor is still alive." Su Qingchen shook his head and said, "I also have something to talk to you about. Since you're here, I don't need to send people to the princess mansion to look for you." Princess Anchi frowned and looked at Su Qingchen, saying, "You're not going back to the princess mansion?" She hesitated and glanced at Ili, saying, "Miss Chu is living in my mansion now. You can take care of her if you go back with her. Isn't it convenient for us to discuss anything?" Ili thought for a while and said before Su Qingchen spoke, "Princess, I'm really sorry that I lied to you before." Princess Anchi frowned in confusion. Ili said in a low voice that, I actually, Lu Yun is not a weak woman who can't even trust a chicken. Today, she and Lin Han entered the palace to save me. I was afraid that you would be suspicious, so I pretended that I didn't know anything." Su Qingchen said indifferently. Ili raised her eyebrows and glared at Su Qingchen. Su Qingchen was as still as a mountain. Princess Anchi looked at him strangely. She looked at Ili and smiled, saying, "That's nothing. It's rare to see a girl from the Central Plains who is good at both the pen and the sword like Miss Chu. Miss Chu did it for Qingchen's safety. I'm not such a petty person." Ili said with a smile, "Thank you, Princess." The three of them moved to the study. Although Princess Anchi had some doubts about Yili's existence, she trusted Su Qingchen and didn't ask any more questions. After all, the delicate girl in front of her had brought someone all the way to Nanzhao and successfully tricked her into saving Su Qingchen. Naturally, she wasn't an ordinary person. Princess Anchi looked at Yili with a complicated gaze. Yili could only smile bitterly in her heart. She glared at Su Qingchen secretly and gave him a look that said, "Explain it to me later." Su Qingchen smiled indifferently and didn't say anything. After entering the study and sitting down, Princess Anchi quickly put the previous private matter to the back of her mind and became serious and focused. Su Qingchen asked, "Did you get the commander's seal?" Princess Anchi shook her head in shame, saying, "I'm sorry, Qingchen. The place where we found the commander's seal was just a cover. It wasn't there at all." Su Qingchen frowned slightly, saying, "Logically speaking, Shu Manlin shouldn't know that we're looking for the commander's seal. No outsider should know where the real commander's seal is. Why did she hide the military book so well and make it look like a trap for us?" Princess Anchi shook her head, saying, "Not many people on our side know about it. I can guarantee that they're all trustworthy." Su Qingchen shook her head. "Of course we can trust your people. But this time, Anchi, don't you think there's something strange about it? In the past 6 months, it seems that every time we're about to catch Shu Manlin's fatal mistake, she'll escape first." Princess Anchi said angrily, "It's all because of Father. Father is always partial to Shu Manlin for no reason. He says she's the saintess of Nanjiang and can't do those things. He says you're trying to sow discord between us. The most ridiculous thing is that it's a misunderstanding. Father is getting more and more muddle-headed these years." Chapter 201. Su Qingchen asked thoughtfully, "Is the king of Nanzhao really senile?" Princess Anchi was startled. She looked sideways at Su Qingchen and asked, "What do you mean?" Su Qingchen said lightly, "We all thought that the king of Nanzhao was biased towards Shu Manlin, but this time, I was drugged and unconscious after I was caught that day. But I remember that I fainted around the end of the afternoon and woke up in the stone room around the quarter of the afternoon. You had already sent people to watch the Saint Ladies' Hall that day, so they could only go back through the palace. But the king of Nanzhao was usually resting in his bedroom during that time. Even if he wasn't there, the guards at the entrance of the secret passage weren't just for show. After that, Anchi, did you hear any rumors about this after you entered the palace?" Princess Anchi thought for a moment and shook her head, "No. When I reported your disappearance to my father, he was very worried and said he would send people to help me find you. But I refused." Su Qingchen smiled faintly. How could the king of Nanjiao not know what happened in his bedroom? Especially when he clearly has people guarding that secret passage at all times. Princess Anqi was startled for a long time. She looked up at Su Qingqian with disbelief and hesitation. You mean that my father wasn't deceived by Shu Manlin at all, and he was biased towards Shu Manlin and helping her? Why? I'm my father's daughter, the crown princess of Nanjiao. I've never done anything unworthy of my status. Maybe it's because the princess is too worthy of your status? Yili raised her eyebrows and said softly. Princess Anqi glanced at her sharply. What do you mean, Miss Chu? Yili blinked and looked at Princess Anqi. There's a saying in the Central Plains. I don't know if the princess has heard of it before. Princess Anqi looked at her silently. Yili said in a low voice, high merit overshadows the ruler. The princess and the king of Nanjiao are naturally father and daughter, but although the princess calls the king of Nanjiao father, in my opinion, he should be the king's father. In the royal family, he should be the king first, then the father. And the princess is the same. She should be the subject first, then the daughter. These days in Nanjiao's capital, I've heard quite a bit of the princess reputation. The people of Nanjiao praise the princess as a wise and far-sighted crown princess. Even a person of the Central Plains like me, who has just arrived in Nanjiao, has such an impression, let alone the common people of Nanjiang who have been graced by the princess. Princess Anqi paled and said in a trembling voice, Are you saying that my father is afraid of me? Is that why you supported Shu Manlin to go against me and suppress me? Yili sighed softly and looked at Princess Anqi with pity. Your Highness, you must have read some history books of the Central Plains. Let's not talk about the distant ones, let's talk about the recent ones. Although your Highness is in the southern border, I'm sure you have some understanding of the situation in King Ding's residence? Princess Anqi's pale lips trembled as she looked at Su Qingqian for help. Su Qingqian sighed softly. Anqi, I once reminded you that going too far is as bad as not going far enough. Princess Anqi bit her lip and lowered her head in silence. Going too far was as bad as falling short. He had said this to her when they first met 4 years ago, but she didn't really take it to heart, because she truly wanted the good of Nanjiao. She could tell anyone with a clear conscience that she never had any selfish motives. She thought that as long as she worked hard to share her father's burdens, her father would be happy. She thought that as long as Nanjiao became rich and powerful, and the common people lived in peace, her sister Xixia wouldn't have to go through a political marriage. But in the end, Xixia went to Dechu State to hide her identity and marry a man as a concubine. Her father had been secretly plotting how to keep her in check. Then all her efforts over the years, what were the things she had done? Looking at Princess Anqi's devastated expression, Yi Li and Su Qingqian could only look at her silently. Such a blow was not something that could be resolved with a few words of comfort. Princess Anqi had to figure it out herself. The atmosphere in the study was solemn. Princess Anqi sat in her chair with her head lowered. Although nothing could be seen from her appearance, she was gripping the armrest so tightly that her fingers turned white. It was obvious that she was not calm at all. Yili praised in her heart. At least Princess Anqi knew how to control herself. This was rare, especially among women. After a long while, Princess Anqi looked up and broke the silence in the study. If I give up everything now, will father? Anqi? Su Qingqian frowned and shook his head. I don't know what the king of Nanjiao will do, but Shu Manlin. Anqi, Shu Manlin hates you. Do you understand? She won't let you go at all. And she will definitely drag Nanjiao into hell. Is this what you want to see? Anqi looked at him in confusion. I know she hates me. At most, I'll go to the Central Plains, Xiling, or the Northern Tribes. But you said, what do you think she wants the commander's seal for? She wants to mobilize the guards of the capital to besiege your residence? I've talked to her a few times. She is very ambitious, but she doesn't have the strength to match her ambition, Su Qingqian said. Princess Anqi's expression was solemn. She looked at Su Qingqian hesitantly. You mean, she wants to, Su Qingqian said. Ask Lu Yun what she did at the border between Nanjiao and the Dechu State. Princess Anqi turned to Yili. Yili said in a low voice, On our way to Nanjiang, we found a man-made snake valley not far from Shattered Snow Pass. Hidden behind the Snake Valley was a very large weapon refinery. All the weapons inside were the weapons used by the Dechu state soldiers. But I found some other things inside. Also, the one who controls this weapon refinery is the chief of the Luai tribe, Lu Jiang. Man-made Snake Valley? She wants to make Dechu state's weapons? What does she want to do? Princess Anqi said angrily. The people of Nanjiang liked snakes, but they didn't like Nanjiang becoming a place full of poisonous snakes. So when Imo Xiaoyao set fire to the Snake Valley, it didn't arouse too much hatred from the people of Nanjiang. She didn't expect that in less than 10 years, another Snake Valley would appear in Nanjiang. As for making weapons from another country in Nanjiang, that crossed Princess Anqi's bottom line. Who knew if these weapons would be used against the people of Nanjiang one day? In Princess Anqi's eyes, this was treason. Did Royal Father know all of this? Was he kept in the dark by Shu Manlin, or was he pretending not to know? Or did Royal Father agree to Shu Manlin's plan? Su Qingchen said, "Isn't it obvious? King Li helped the Saintess of Nanjiao obtain Nanjiao. In return, Shu Manlin will help King Li obtain Dechu State." Idiot! Princess Anqi scolded. Helping King Li obtain Dechu State was easier said than done. How big of a price would it have to pay? Not to mention the losses Nanjiao would suffer if they failed. Even if they succeeded, what benefits would Nanjiao receive? At that time, Nanjiao would have to rely on Imo Jingli, just like Nanjiang hundreds of years ago. "I want to go to the palace and ask Royal Father," Princess Anqi said in unison. Chapter 202. Anqi. Su Qingchen looked at her disapprovingly. Princess Anqi looked back at the two and said in a low voice, "You don't have to persuade me. Qingchen, I don't know why you came to Nanjiao, but if it wasn't for you, I would have been tricked by Shu Manlin long ago. So, I still have to thank you. You are outsiders, and this is the capital of Nanjiao. It may not be difficult for you to escape unscathed, but if Father really decides to fall out with us, you won't be able to hold on for long. Leave Nanjiao as soon as possible. I'll do what I have to do." Su Qingchen said, "Is it something you should do as the crown princess of Nanjiang to throw yourself into a trap?" Princess Anqi smiled bitterly. The title of crown princess was bestowed by Father. If Father is determined to side with Shu Manlin, even 10 crown princesses won't be able to do anything. I must go and have a talk with Father. Looking at Princess Anqi's resolute expression, the two knew they couldn't persuade her. Su Qingchen said in a low voice, "Anqi, take care." Anqi smiled and said, "Don't worry. I'm Father's only daughter now. He won't kill me." Seeing Princess Anqi's figure disappear at the door, Yili sighed and asked Su Qingchen, "Brother, aren't you moved at all?" Princess Anqi is the most special woman I've ever seen. Su Qingchen glanced at her indifferently and said, "What nonsense are you talking about? Princess Anqi and I are friends." Yili blinked. "Then why didn't you let me tell Princess Anqi the truth? That means you know it in your heart, right?" Su Qingchen looked at her angrily. "Do you spend all your time thinking about these things? It's impossible to begin with. Why do you have to worry about it?" Yili nodded. "I understand. Princess Anqi is a proud woman. She knows you have a fiancé, so she won't have any thoughts about you in the future. But brother, you haven't been using this method to block your luck in love all these years, have you? Let me say this first. I was in the wrong this time. Don't even think about using me as a shield in the future." Su Qingchen raised his hand and threw a booklet to Yili. Yili caught it and looked at the handwriting on it. It was a report from the Tianyi Pavilion on the situation in the capital of Nanjiao. Her heart sank. "Brother, will Princess Anqi be all right?" Su Qingchen shook his head and said, "Even a vicious tiger will not eat its cubs. Princess Xixia is already a dead person. Anqi is indeed the only daughter of the Nanjiao king. Once something happens to Anqi, Nanjiao can only be handed over to the side branch of the imperial family to inherit, and the king of Nanjiao is not very prestigious. It is very likely that he will be removed from the throne because there is no successor." Yili raised her eyebrows in surprise. "There's such a rule? Nanjiang is different from our central plains. Daughters can also inherit the throne, but there is no such thing as adoption." If there is no heir, The people of Nanjiang will think that because the king of Nanjiao is not protected by the gods, he is unable to protect his people, so it is natural for him to abdicate. Yili nodded. It is good that there is no danger. We can make other plans in the future. Mississippi, an heir appeared at the door. What is it? Just now, the Tianyi Pavilion sent news that Master Liang can't take it anymore. Sickly Scholar took Master Liang to the place where the treasure is hidden. Young Master Han also rushed over. An heir said in a low voice, "Damn it, why is he joining in the fun? Why is everything happening at the same time?" Yili cursed in a low voice. She raised her head and ordered, "You and an heir get ready. We will go immediately." Yes. An heir quickly disappeared at the door. Yili turned to Su Qingchen and said, "Brother, I have to go first. If there is anything you need, just tell the Shadow Guard to do it. Since Princess Anqi said so, shouldn't you leave Nanjiao as soon as possible?" Su Qingchen shook his head. "I still have some things to figure out. I am living here now. You be careful." Yili nodded. "Brother, be careful too." Yili led an heir to quickly follow the marks left by the Tianyi Pavilion and the Shadow Guard. Fortunately, Nanjiang was not particularly vast. The area near the capital was naturally not very large. After riding for more than 4 hours, they finally found the address mentioned in the message from the Tianyi Pavilion. They found the mark left by Han Mingxi at the foot of the mountain. "Young master, it is here. They have entered the mountain." Yili nodded. She turned and ordered, "Let's go separately." An heir objected. "No, it is too dangerous for young master to go alone." Yili was helpless. "An heir, come with me." An heir, follow secretly.
Yes.
She led an heir all the way into the mountain, following the mark left by Han Mingxi. The mountain forests of Nanjiang were more humid than the north. There were all kinds of poisonous insects and plants. Fortunately, this was not a problem for the two. They went all the way in the direction of the mark. "Young master, look ahead." An heir held her weapon in her hand and stared ahead vigilantly. Several men wearing the Tianyi Pavilion's uniform were lying at the foot of the small hill in front of them. The blood from their wounds had already coagulated. It was obvious that they had been dead for a long time. Yili furrowed her brows. She tilted her head and listened carefully to the surroundings. She then pointed in another direction and said, "Let's go that way." Anson took the lead and walked in front. Along the way, they saw some corpses of the Tianyi Pavilion. An heir said in a low voice, "There are no people from our side." Yili frowned deeply and kept walking forward. After walking for more than an hour, they finally heard the faint sound of weapons clashing and people talking in front of them. The two looked at each other and carefully sneaked over. At the entrance of a cave, Sickly Scholar looked at the person sitting on the ground with a smug smile and said with a malicious smile, "Han Mingxi, do you really think that I don't dare to touch you because I'm afraid of your big brother? Your Tianyi Pavilion has been against me all along the way. I'm being polite by sparing your life until now, right?" Han Mingxi fell to the ground awkwardly. The folding fan with famous inscriptions that he usually pretended to be elegant had been thrown to the side in the dust. He coughed twice and said, "If that's the case, why don't you kill me?" "Haha, don't worry. You've worked so hard for Chu Junwei. I should let you see him before you die. Isn't that right? Don't worry. When the time comes, I'll send him down to accompany you." Sickly Scholar sneered and said, "That guy surnamed Chu is really bold. He hasn't been in the Jianghu before, so he doesn't know my reputation. Don't you know Han Mingxi? When have I ever shared my things with others? He actually dared to ask me for a reward and even wanted the Biluo flower. Haha. Cough cough. Now that the Biluo flower is here, I'd like to see whether you, a friend he's only known for a few days, or the priceless treasure is more important in his eyes." "Boring," Han Mingxi whispered disdainfully. Sickly Scholar was obviously very proud. He sneered and said, "Enjoy the rest of your time. You'd better pray that Chu Junwei really thinks you're important and can come here within 2 hours. Otherwise, I can only miss this good show and return your body to him." Yili quietly looked at the scene not far away and pondered with lowered eyebrows. After a while, Ansan returned to her side and whispered, "There's no ambush around." Yili nodded and stood up to walk outside. and San wanted to reach out and pull her back, but it was too late. Seeing Yi Li's back make a gesture to hide, and San could only hide again. She looked at an heir who was hiding on the other side and then stared at the grass outside the cave. Chapter 203. Seeing Yi Li leisurely walk over with her hands behind her back, Sickly Scholar's eyes flashed. You really came. Yi Li calmly stepped forward. Her gaze swept over Han Mingxi, then slowly landed on Sickly Scholar. She smiled and said, Third Master, it's not a good habit to burn bridges after crossing the river. Sickly Scholar narrowed his eyes and snorted. Burning bridges after crossing the river? You can only blame yourself for being too greedy. Yi Li helplessly hit her palm with her folding fan and sighed. This world is really not what it used to be. Forget it. I'll just take it that I'm unlucky this time. Tell me, what do you want? No matter what, how about letting Han Mingxi go first? I know you're not afraid of Han Mingyue, but I think Ling Taihan wouldn't want you to provoke the Tianyi Pavilion. You? How dare you threaten me with Big Brother? Yi Li waved the folding fan in her hand and said with a smile, No, it just so happens that I have an elder brother who is Pavilion Masterling's best friend. What's more, I told him before coming here. If something happens to us here, he'll naturally go home and report my death. Of course, he won't forget to inform young Master Mingyue and Pavilion Masterling. What do you think? When it comes to making enemies, it's better to make as few as possible, right? Sickly Scholar looked at Han Mingxi on the ground, then looked at Yi Li and said, All right, Han Mingxi can go. You stay. Yi Li nodded. No problem. Han Mingxi sat on the ground and didn't move. Yi Li frowned and asked, What's wrong? Are you seriously injured? Han Mingxi snorted and frowned. The cloth on his left leg was black. Obviously, he was seriously injured. Yi Li took 2 steps forward and asked with concern, Mingxi, are you all right? Han Mingxi looked up and shook his head. I'm fine. Junwei, you don't have to worry about me. Let's go. Yi Li shook her head and smiled. You got into trouble with Sickly Scholar because of me. How can I leave you behind? Mingxi, it was wrong of me to lie to you before. You should call me by my real name. The name Junwei. I'm actually not too used to it. Han Mingxi's face flashed with a strange color. He nodded and said, I know. Yi Li smiled and said, Let me help you up. Han Mingxi nodded and raised his hand to take Yi Li's outstretched hand. No. The change seemed to happen in an instant. Han Mingxi's hand that was about to hold Yi Li suddenly changed. Like an eagle's claw, it grabbed Yi Li. At the same time, Yi Li leaned back. The hand that was holding the folding fan glowed with a brilliant silver light. Almost at the same time, a figure rushed out of the cave like lightning and threw himself at Yi Li. Yi Li frowned and the dagger in her hand flew out. Cough, cough. The person who threw himself at Yi Li had the same face as Han Mingxi. But at this time, he looked particularly embarrassed. A trace of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. Junwei, are you okay? Yi Li pulled the person away and said coldly and angrily, I'm fine. The one who's not fine is you, idiot. The palm of the person opposite just hit him on the back. Yi Li raised her head and looked at the person like a knife. Young Master Mingyu, are you satisfied now? Han Mingxi. Han Mingyue had a dagger in her shoulder. Her dark red clothes were wet. He stared at the person supported by Yi Li, and his eyes were full of anger. Han Mingxi, you bastard. What are you doing? Who allowed you to come out? Han Mingxi leaned weakly on Yi Li. Yi Li's body was not tall to support his slender figure. Han Mingxi also looked at the man who looked almost the same as himself. He smiled provocatively and said, I already said that you can't fool Junwei if you want to pretend to be this young master with your lousy acting skills. Also, is this young master as a bastard as you? Presumptuous. Do you want to die for a person you just met a few days ago? Do you know who she is? Han Mingyue said coldly. Han Mingxi was startled. He gritted his teeth and said, No matter who she is, she's my friend. Even if I only know her for a few days, she's still better than you. At least Junwei will come to save me. You? If something happens to you, who will care about your life and death? Hearing her brother's roar, Han Mingyue was obviously stunned. She looked at the two people in front of her with a complicated expression. She quickly recovered and looked at Yili. She raised her eyebrows and said, "Sister-in-law, please let go of my brother first." Han Mingxi's body stiffened. He looked down at Yili in disbelief. It was as if he wanted to see what she had to make Han Mingyue call her sister-in-law. After a long while, she sneered with difficulty. "Big brother, you can't be confused after being stabbed, right? Don't go around claiming to be relatives. I don't have a second big brother." Han Mingyue sneered and pointed at Yili. "Han Mingxi, open your eyes and look carefully. Is the person standing in front of you a man? Or have you been outside for so long that you can't even tell the difference between a man and a woman?" Yili helped Han Mingxi to the side and sat down. Then she slowly pushed him away and looked at Han Mingxi apologetically. "Brother Han Mingxi, I'm sorry I lied to you." Han Mingxi stared at her for a long time. Then he unwillingly curled his lips and said, "All right, I know you're a woman. Seeing that we've gone through life and death together, you should at least tell me which sister-in-law you are, right? I don't want to hear that bastard say it." Yili looked back at Sickly Scholar, who was staring at her with hatred, and Han Mingyue, who was stupefied. She whispered, "My name is Yili. Yili? Su Qingqin is your big brother." "That's right. Su Qingqin is your big brother. Your third Miss Yi. You're." Han Mingxi stared at him. His expression was as uncomfortable as if he had swallowed a fly. He had seen third Miss Yi before. The problem was, how did this handsome young man look like that sly rich young lady who pretended to be elegant? He had already sworn to stay away from that woman. Why was he still hanging around her these days? "You lied to me," Han Mingxi accused. Yili apologized. "I'm sorry. Just because you're sorry? I want compensation. I want 10% of the Fragrant Elegance Pavilion." Yili nodded readily. "No problem." Han Mingxi narrowed his eyes and continued to raise his conditions. At least 4 bottles of new perfume every year. Yili hesitated for a moment, but still nodded. "Okay." Han Mingxi tilted his head and looked at her for a while. He seemed to be assessing whether her words were trustworthy or not. After a while, he raised his head and said proudly, "Since it's like this young master reluctantly forgives you for lying. I also admit that you, Yili, are my, Han Mingxi's, friend." Yili didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She said helplessly, "Thank you, Brother Han, for being so magnanimous." Han Mingxi still snorted in dissatisfaction. He looked at Han Mingyue in disdain and said, "See? You still have the nerve to say that you know how to make money. The Han family is really counting on you to not starve to death." Han Mingyue's face darkened. She glared at Han Mingxi and said, "It's too late to talk nonsense. If you're done, then scram to the side." Han Mingxi rolled his eyes at him. "Are you stupid? This woman is my friend. She's my future business partner. Why don't you try touching her?" Chapter 204. Han Mingxi. Han Mingyue sternly said, "This young master knows what his name is." Han Mingxi lazily leaned against the hillside and picked at his ears. "Young Master Han, have you finished reminiscing? If you don't make a move, it will be too late when the people from the Ding Kingdom's estate arrive." Sickly Scholar's voice sounded sinisterly behind him. Han Mingyue lightly snorted and casually pulled out the dagger from his shoulder and threw it to the side. The injury on his shoulder caused him to involuntarily knit his brows. He indifferently looked at Han Mingxi and said, "Mingxi, stand to the side. Don't force me to make a move." Han Mingxi clenched his teeth and forcefully stood in front of Yili. He said, "You can touch her if you want to, but you have to hit me first." Han Mingyue didn't say anything else and reached out to grab Han Mingxi's shoulder. Han Mingxi had just suffered a palm strike. Although Han Mingyue promptly withdrew her inner strength, he still suffered a serious internal injury. At this moment, his left arm was simply too weak. Moreover, he wasn't Han Mingyue's opponent to begin with. Yili, who was standing behind Han Mingxi, pulled the person in front of her, and pushed him away. At the same time, she didn't forget to block Han Mingyue's moves. Yili's inner strength was lacking, but she was extremely skilled in close combat. Every move she made was not the least bit fanciful. Every time the silver dagger flashed in her hand, it would always bring about a moderate amount of blood. Han Mingyue couldn't help but frown at such a murderous fighting style. He consecutively sent out a few palm strikes and retreated several meters. I haven't seen you for almost a year. I didn't expect sister-in-law's skills to have improved so rapidly. If Yili was able to catch him off guard a year ago, then this time, the two of them were relying on real martial arts. Yili faintly frowned and said, I don't dare to accept the title of sister-in-law. Mr. Han, I did business with the Tianyi Pavilion at a clear price, but now you're selling me to someone else. Is this how you do business? Could it be that Tianyi Pavilion thrives on deceiving customers? Han Mingyue's expression was as sincere and helpless as ever. Wang Fei is still as humorous as ever. In this world, there were always many things that made people feel helpless. Even if they didn't want to do it, they still had to do it. Isn't that so? Yili raised her eyebrows and smiled. If Imo Xiaoyao were here right now, would you say that it was a misunderstanding again? Han Mingyue smiled but didn't say anything. Sickly Scholar sneered. If Imo Xiaoyao is here, he'll die with you. Yili turned to look at the restless Sickly Scholar and said with a faint smile, Third Pavilion Master, I advise you not to act rashly. If anything happens, I won't be able to explain it to Pavilion Masterling. Sickly Scholar sneered angrily and took a step forward, wanting to say something. With a whoosh, two arrows, one from the left and one from the right, brushed past him one after the other and landed on the ground less than a foot away from him. Sickly Scholar's face turned pale. Yili smiled and said, I've already told Third Pavilion Master that I don't like to take risks. Seeing Sickly Scholar's ugly expression, Han Mingyue chuckled and said, Sister-in-law, you don't have to scare us. I've already lured the Shadow Guard away. Now that you're in such a hurry, there are at most 2 or 3 people with you. Yili smiled and said, Even so, there are still 3 of us. What about you, Mr. Mingyue? Han Mingxi sat on the ground and said in a clear voice, Not 3, it's 4. Clearly, he was determined to stand against his older brother. Han Mingyue ignored her younger brother and stared at Yili with a smile. Last time in Jing, Wang Fei made me look at you in a different light. This time, you've surprised me even more. The Ding Wang Fei has disguised herself as a man and come alone to Nanjiang. Presumably, the commotion in the palace yesterday was also Wang Fei's doing? Yili said faintly, Mingyu Gongzi was able to set up such a trap here today. Presumably, you've been in Nanjiao for a long time. Why ask when you already know the answer? Han Mingyue raised an eyebrow and said, It was just a coincidence. If I knew Wang Fei was here, I would have prepared well and wouldn't have taken such a risk. Yili raised an eyebrow and said with a smile, Then, does Mingyu Gongzi think you can kill me today? Han Mingyue shook her head and said with a laugh, Wang Fei misunderstands. With Ding Wang Fei in hand, how many things can be done? If I kill you like this, wouldn't it spoil the fun? Han Mingyue, Sickly Scholar shouted in dissatisfaction. The reason why he cooperated with Han Mingyue's plan was to kill Imo Xiaoyao's wife. What did Han Mingyue mean now? His malicious eyes stared coldly at the handsome man in front of him. If he dared to use him and didn't fulfill his promise, he would let him know why no one dared to provoke Sickly Scholar in Jianghu. Han Mingyue looked at Sickly Scholar and said with a faint smile, Third Pavilion Master, Ding Wang Fei really can't be killed yet. Although Third Pavilion Master is from Xiling, you should have heard of the surging winds in Dechu State's capital these past 6 months. If we kill Ding Wang Fei now, I'm afraid neither you nor I will be able to escape the pursuit of Ding Wang Fu. Sickly Scholar sneered and said, Are you afraid? I'm not afraid. Who was better at killing than the Yinwang Chamber of Commerce? Han Mingyue helplessly lowered her head and said with a bitter smile, I'm really a little afraid. Third Pavilion Master, I'll take Ding Wang Fei away today. If Third Pavilion Master needs any help in the future, Han Mingyue will agree.